Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to Yu-Gi-Oh! And video game news. Let's hop in here. So I played a little bit more off screen as far as the special qualifier, World Championship events qualifiers. We've got some new daily quests again, a login reward, and a Duel Live Road to World Championships we had already done. Still probably need to play a lot though. That's the one thing here, is that I'm probably just winning a little bit too much, or there's just a lot of encouragement here to get past stage 1 for most players and then continue playing as much in stage 2 as you did in stage 1. And all of that's going to really boil down to really neglecting the oh, we don't even have one. It's going to come down to really neglecting the ranked play for the rest of this month, which that'll be an issue. For the accountability section, I think we can do that very quickly today and say that I did play a little bit of Lego DC Supervillains, but I really am dropping the ball quite a bit in those recordings in which I'm just going quiet and not really saying much. There really is not a lot to be said that isn't just extremely repetitive while going through the process. I have pretty much all the red bricks now, so I can run around the open world, and I'm hoping that the experience of running around the open world, particularly in this case, is going to be a lot shorter, 3 to 6 hours, not 12 to 20 hours, and then running through the free play versions of the levels to clean up the last bits of collectibles. I'm hoping that's fairly quick too, so then I could just move on to some other game. Because yeah, being weak in story, having weak levels, Lego DC Supervillains really is just weak everywhere around. I don't know, maybe the open world's a lot better than I think it's going to be, but I doubt it. So yeah, we're at level 14, and we very possibly could get to level 20 today. So let's hop in. I mostly spent yesterday not doing any YouTube stuff. I did find out that there is a strip mall relatively close to me. In fact, really close to me, within walking distance. And I'd known it's there, I just had never gone to a strip mall and looked in it. And in general, that's probably true for a lot of people, is that there's these small collections of businesses with doors that open to the outside. That's basically what a strip mall is. But you just drive by them and you never really go in them. So I walked down the whole strip, which is, it's not a very big one, and found out that there was a free play arcade and a barber shop and a very large, it looked like, collection of comic books in a comic book store. I mean, so man, if I was 9 or 10 and had lived where I live now, I would have been set, assuming those businesses were also in existence at that time. Like to be within walking distance of both an arcade, particularly a free play arcade, where it's probably not the worst deal ever. It's not a great deal. It seemed like it was like $10 per person per day to play, which is not super cheap if you were going to do it on a weekly basis, but not terrible. and I didn't actually go into the comic book store, so I'm not sure that there's 100% certainty that there would be a game room in the store, which that's really what you need, is a weekly event game room type section, if it is just a comic book store, and that they're not encouraging people to have their weekly Dungeons and Dragons, weekly Pathfinder, weekly Pokemon, weekly Magic the Gathering, weekly Yu-Gi-Oh! Yeah. If you're not doing those kinds of game nights, you're really failing to bring in your hardcore fans, and you almost certainly would fail as a comic book store if you didn't have a game room. But it is possible, certainly, that there would be a particularly jerk-ish owner of a company that wouldn't go for that. That is always my caution, certainly as far as comic book stores too, is that from my perspective, if I was going to go in the comic book store, I would almost certainly want to bring in my nieces and nephews, and I'll do my part certainly to say, hey, look, this guy is going to be prickly, and he's not going to want you to sit there and read comics. If the comics are in plastic or and have cardboard on them, you cannot open them, you cannot read them, even if they are open, and you can flip through them. You don't read them. Just if you want to flip through them really quick for a second, that's fine, but don't try to read the whole comic, because this is a business and that's the only way he makes money, and he's gonna get mad at you, and you need this guy to be your best friend because he's going to give you discounts, possibly, if you do enough business, and he's going to maintain your collection with a pull box and a long box. Although I suppose it is possible you go to a comic book store and you do everything right on your side, and the comic book guy is still your typical comic book nerd pain in the butt, or even worse. But yeah, that's definitely from the perspective that I would be looking for, is to have somebody with a really good demeanor, on top of having a decent collection of comics. Actually, the collection of comics is not even that big of a deal when you're trying to get kids just to read more. Like, if I went in there by myself and said, hey, do you have a collection of either floppies or trade paperbacks of like Scooby-Doo or anything really young kid friendly? I think the name of the trading card game that is more Christian based is called Divinity. If you could get, I don't even know if it's actually a trading card game. It may be a deck building game. But yeah, if you could get Divinity, or whatever its name is, that's a great way to potentially convert more conservative parents into letting their kids learn the general mechanics of collectible card games, or trading card games, or deck building games. He's probably going to have board games and things like that. And he's probably going to have a collection of board games that is very different, more of the German style board games and tabletop games, than going to a toy aisle in a Walmart, where you're going to see almost exclusively Hasbro games like Monopoly and Scrabble and things like that. He's also going to have a good comic book person is almost certainly going to have a good knowledge. So questions like, is there a kid-friendly introductory Pathfinder / Dungeons and Dragons type game. He could probably answer that. He could probably also answer, is there something that is like Dungeons and Dragons but doesn't have Dungeons and Dragons in it, in the name, or as much demonic imagery? Because there definitely are some dangers there. Like Munchkin, it's probably kid-friendly, but it may not be. And Munchkin is not a Dungeons and Dragons game. It's a card game, but the same thing. As Munchkin looks like it would be kid-friendly in its art style, but it might still be a little risky. And at a certain point, yes, you can only go so far. Like, there will always be extremely, like, religious parents that are just going to hate anything and everything. And honestly, there's also a lot of broke people, certainly, that can use any excuse, including religion, to say no to a new hobby. There's also people that straight up just hate anything that's not physical as a hobby. And those are your standard sports people. Physical activity definitely is good to a certain extent, and kids should have a lot of it, but like, if you've got your kids in 5 different sports and you're working them towards being in the Olympics, that's pretty extreme. But yeah, anyways, I don't want to go into a major rant on my minimal understanding of comic book shops. I definitely am more of a fair weather, not even really fan of comics myself, and haven't spent too much time in the comics. When I was a kid, I would go to a used bookstore that had comic sections, but it definitely was not a comic shop. And the used bookstore owner liked us because we were looking specifically, or like me, because I was looking specifically for Nintendo Super Mario Brothers comics, some very old stuff even at that time, and I was able to find it. And since I was only looking for that one thing, I was also organizing out of just a small bit of OCD. I guess I was more OCD possibly even then than I am now. I was organizing all the comic books to line up and be in nice little stacks. He didn't have them in long boxes or anything like that, so he wasn't even storing the comic books in the right way, because he didn't really care. And so he actually said, you know what, I actually like you guys because you're not like the other kids that just make a mess of the stacks. Of course, it's his own fault. If he had stored them in long boxes, they would have been lined up perfectly fine. Nothing was bagged or cardboarded, so all the comics were not likely to be worth anything. And frankly, it was almost 100% a collection designed to distract kids while the adults were looking at other used books. And the fact that a used bookstore could even exist really speaks to how long in the past this was. This was before the almost complete collapse of anybody reading. There's still used bookstores these days, but not so much in the same way that there used to be a lot of bookstores for new bookstores like Barnes & Nobles, and not so much anymore. Amazon.com in particular, its first victim was bookstores, which is ironic because by modern standards, Amazon.com I think is probably pretty awful as a source of buying books. But the truth of the matter is it was already a pretty awful experience. buying books and going to stores in general. Like Amazon.com only really had to be slightly better than your average experience of going to a mall or buying things from random stores. Like if you went to Radio Shack to try and get electronics, you would all often just be completely ignored, or the people would be very unhelpful. If you went to, say, a Sears in Roebuck to buy something, you are often either be ignored or the people would be very unhelpful. If you go to hardware stores today, it's pretty much the exact same case. Electronic stores were probably, as far as TVs and appliances, were the last bastion of which somebody would actually at least be able to BS and sell, try and sell you a TV based on features and describe the product. Whereas nowadays you go to a Best Buy and they're going to look at the sticker and try and spout back what it says on the label, or they're going to pull it up on their website and just spout back what the website says. We have long since lost the art of a salesman being informed about the product they're selling or carrying in any way. So why not buy it from Amazon.com? At least on Amazon.com you can look at stars, and even though Amazon.com is flooded with fake reviews, at least you're getting some small percentage that you would hope would influence the reviewers and stars. Amazon is full of terrible kind of scammy products, particularly when you start to get into electronics and weird things. But they're actually pretty good about getting rid of those scammy weird things after a couple of months, unlike stores that would probably keep it on the shelf forever. Let's see if this works for us. So, I guess now that I know there's a comic book store, it probably would be nice to buy local. So, I may decide to swoop in there when it's time to do Christmas shopping. That being said, right now I guess I'm waiting for Memorial Day sales. I think it's fair to kind of name TCL at this point, as far as they emailed me back and forth 5 or 6 times long troubleshooting lists to hopefully fix the TV that's completely broken, but then they basically ghosted me as soon as it became obvious that they were going to have to replace it. And at a certain point, if they had followed up and said, okay, we just need to wait to find a refurbished unit to send as a replacement, that would be a little bit acceptable, not super acceptable. I think particularly when you're talking a TV, if you've got a broken TV for more than 3 or 4 days, somebody's going to be very unhappy about that. Like, that's not really acceptable unless it's a case that you're, say, a school that has TVs on the walls all over the place. Then one TV being down isn't going to be really a big problem. But as far as residential people, one TV being down is a big issue. So yeah, seems like they're just going to actively try and screw me on that, and whatever. I mean, the only thing I can imagine I could do is contact Walmart where I bought it and say, hey, they're not honoring their warranty, and then Walmart would possibly do something, but more than likely they would say, well, our hands are clean of it, we only gave a 90-day warranty. You could always sue. That is totally a possibility. And see, I did all of those cards just so I could do this, and he wouldn't be able to activate his ability to counter it. Like 3 or 4 cards specifically just around that trick. Actually, I should have probably said yes to activating that, and then just banish this card out of safety. Come to think of it. So, yeah, if Memorial Day happens, and there happens to be a Memorial Day sale, very specifically for a Samsung TV, then I think I would just buy that. Otherwise, I may just wait for a Samsung TV sale, although it's not likely that there's going to be major discounts. Specifically, I've locked in on Samsung just for the brightness and contrast ratio. It really was a massive difference, like going to a Walmart and window shopping for TVs. Samsung was by far the best, and LG's were slightly worse. I think it was LG's that were the second one. Might have even been Pioneers or Panasonics. But yeah, Samsung's were by far the best, and then there was one that was slightly worse, and then everything else was considerably worse as far as the brightness in a brightly lit Walmart. So, like, and brightness is what I'm looking for more than anything else. Yes, there are some nice features, like I'd like to have Google TV running on Android 12 and have a good chance of even going to Android 13 and all of that, but I can work around that too and get it plug in a streaming device. I just found out too, and that I really am rambling, we'll get into the video game news pretty quickly here, that 4K UHD discs will not play in a Blu-ray player that doesn't support them, which is not what I thought. Like, if anybody has any expertise on this, I'd like to know. I thought the way 4K UHD discs worked is that the first couple of layers, which would have been the equivalent of a double layer Blu-ray disc that would have been about 25 gigs. I thought that those first couple of layers were the data for a standard 1080p Blu-ray. And then the 4K aspect was when you got to the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th layers. Which, yeah, I think it's somewhere, I thought it was somewhere between 6 or 8 layers after that, just because you need so much more data. Obviously, that's how I would design that, too. It would have made a lot of sense, frankly, to retroactively to have planned ahead and even have, like, DVDs work in the same way, where the first layer of a Blu-ray would be the exact equivalent of the DVDs. But at least in that case, the reason you know that isn't the case is because the Blu-ray lasers were at a much smaller wavelength than the red lasers that DVDs had, and blue lasers basically were unaffordable and non-existent when DVDs were first made. So yeah, theoretically we could come out with a new standard that was much higher in the indigo range and just smaller and smaller wavelengths, and then you could fit more and more data on it. The reason to kind of avoid doing that is because if you get a scratch and the data's smaller and smaller, it will damage more and more. Of course, that's always going to be the problem. Well, this was a long game to end up losing. There definitely are cases as I'm playing where obviously my deck does just not hold up. It stands up well enough to get to the second stage, I think, but I definitely need to do a deck rebuild, and I've been saying that for a long time. Also, I don't think losses knock you down in any way, so you just have to win. This is a Video Games Chronicle article that is important, but honestly, I don't know if I have too much to say. Take-Two thinks that mid-generation console refreshes are likely. The company has also discussed plans to continue supporting Switch and last-gen consoles. Basically, Take-Two CEO Strauss Zelnick was interviewed by GameIndustry.biz and gave some responses. Mid-generation console refreshes. I mean, at a certain point, there always are mid-generation console refreshes, in the sense that the Switch OLED version is a mid-generation console refresh, and the Xbox 360 first model was changed to a second model at some point, and the Switch model, the first version model of the Switch, was changed. There's always usually, after a couple years, at the very least, what do I want to get rid of? I guess this one. A reduction in parts counts, a reduction in price, and optimization. Often it's not to the benefit of the consumer in any way to have the second model. I guess PlayStation 3 in particular is probably a good example of that, because I think the PlayStation 3 had 2 or 3 mid-generation console refreshes. But yeah, it's important to realize what they're talking about there. They're not talking about an Xbox Series X that's going to have more RAM or faster RAM, or more it might have more hard drive space, because that's something that's variable, but the CPU processing power is going to be the same. The GPU processing power is going to be the same. Same is true for the PlayStation 5. They're going to stay in that same standard, even if they did, because of parts reasons, opt to go with a faster CPU or GPU. They would almost certainly artificially limit it to be exactly the same as the original consoles. Although they do sometimes enjoy rumors that would cause somebody to buy a mid-generation console refresh that the newer version is better. Xbox 360, I guess, is probably most notorious for a mid-generation console refresh, in that they were refreshing the red ring of death problem at some point. But yeah, a mid-generation console refresh barely has anything to do with whether or not they would speed up or slow down the release of the next Xbox or the next PlayStation. Which, it is also worth mentioning that I was listening to DF Retro's podcast, which I kind of think DF Retro's podcast doesn't say a lot, but it's probably worth listening to on a more weekly basis. I guess I'm getting into that as I'm running out of podcasts. Also, I think we'll probably have less nonsense like Giant Bomb's podcast in that case, so I think I could tolerate DF Retro's podcast a little bit more. But yeah, they were talking. What were they talking about? I lost my train of thought there. I went on too many tangents and lost the path. Here we have our tier limits. And so at this point, is it too late? Or do I have to sacrifice this guy to do this? And while we're at it, since I think this guy's gonna die, let's do it twice. Well, anyways, yeah. Mid-generation console refreshes are not really going to affect much, and that's why I guess I don't have too much to say. I do remember now, DF Retro was talking about, there are rumors, I suppose, of this portable handheld console in development by PlayStation. So the rumors that Sharp is potentially working on a portable handheld device and making the logical assumption that that means Sharp LCD screens would be in the next Switch aren't 100% confirmed. It could be PlayStation working on something. It could also be a whole new company doing a whole new thing. Nothing really would stop, well, Sony or Microsoft from making a whole new subdivision, making a whole new company, a whole new brand, something not labeled PlayStation, not labeled Xbox, and nothing stops Amazon or Google or even Valve from making a device, or a new company from making a device. I wouldn't put it past some of the craziness we've seen from Embracer Group or Atari for them to try to make their own handheld console. So yeah, I tried to impress that when the rumors of Sharp making an LCD screen for a console was announced. We just won't know until we know. And in a lot of ways, DF Retro also echoed my own concerns that LCD screens are really going to be a step back. Like, unless Nintendo is trying to make a really, really cheap device, which that would be about the only reason to go with an LCD, is to say, hey, we're going to make a device that sells for 100. Yeah, if they were trying to make like $100 device, that would make sense. We still don't really have devices in that age range, whereas it is very much a case that you're an 8-9-year-old, you might get $100 of money for your birthday, where $100 is still not going to be anywhere close to $250 to $300 to own a Switch alone, let alone a game to go with the Switch. Like, people don't have money and they're broke, and yet the luxuries of a console, as far as the price, have gone up and up. And you can talk inflation and all you want, but inflation has never been an accurate calculation once we got into this world of mass consumerism that we're in now. Inflation only made sense when you literally could only buy a loaf of bread. And so when there was a grocery store that only sold one kind of loaf of bread from one factory or one manufacturer or one bakery, and when the price potentially went from 1 penny for a loaf of bread to 2 pennies, effectively doubling the price, that's when inflation works as a concept purely. Inflation as a concept completely falls apart when they introduce premium styles of bread and it becomes a societally normal to buy premium bread, or they introduce multitudes of bread-like products such as frozen waffles, toast, cereal, things like that, that are directly competing with bread, or just new categories of things you would purchase. And there's a lot of value, certainly, in having video game consoles just to keep kids entertained, because kids do need a massive amount of entertainment. Yep. So I don't think even at $250 a Switch is a ripoff, but there is a large division between the cost and what the cost really should be. And in a lot of ways, Nintendo has manipulated the cost of their consoles a lot more than Sony or PlayStation, in that the Nintendo Switch is less powerful than an Xbox 360, technically. So they have put very underpowered hardware in it, and that has caused a lot of second-party and third-party games to run particularly poorly, where Nintendo only has to optimize a few games because they're only putting out a few first-party titles anyways, and they're always doing it with their Nintendo cartoony art style, which isn't as visually demanding. That being said, DF Retro also applauded Tears of the Kingdom for being a very polished release, not particularly buggy, not having major problems. There are some frame drops when you use one of the effects, and that's about all they can push to. That being said, they also, on DF Retro, and this is, I guess, just at this point me recapping what I listened to on DF Retro, they started to talk about how there's a in square footage 1-for-1 ratio underground world in Tears of the Kingdom, and in the sky there are floating sky islands that adds a significant amount of square footage too. So it does really seem like, with the traditional temple ideas coming back and the underground world, I assume, being a lot of the temples, and the sky areas also being some temples, it does kind of feel like I probably would enjoy Tears of the Kingdom a lot more. That doesn't mean I'm going to run to the closest GameStop or video game store and buy it, but yeah, I think I would be willing to give Tears of the Kingdom a shot and just skip Breath of the Wild. In fact, the guy on DF Retro had the exact same problem I had with DF Retro. He lost interest halfway through it because there wasn't just this linear narrative pushing you forward. Of course, if I'm going to play my Switch, I probably would play like Luigi's Mansion 3 first, or Prime, the Metroid Prime Trilogy Remastered, or more Pokemon Snap. Of course, I don't have time to do any of that. I'm just increasingly dropping the ball. And over this weekend, I also need to work on my new router a little bit. There's a decent possibility that I'd be completely done with it by the end of this weekend if everything works well. I did run into a slight problem in that I was deleting files and then I paused the action of deleting the files, and that literally never works in Windows. I also saw a YouTube video of a different YouTuber installing Chimera OS on the Asus ROG Ally. Which Chimera OS is kind of a ARC-based Linux that then allows you to try and install Steam OS, although I guess in that case you're probably not really installing Steam OS as much as you're installing the packages that Steam OS would include to make it look like Steam OS, because you're still running Chimera OS as the actual operating system. But it did seem like it worked pretty well, so you might get much better performance on the ROG Ally if you put Linux on it and Chimera OS and go that route. Well, didn't have enough cards. Which means I should have activated that in my hand so I could have summoned something different. I basically needed these to activate this turn, because I didn't. My only hope would be that I could activate this. Otherwise I'm basically going to lose. He just has to figure out a way to do another 1,000 damage. See, this guy can activate like once per turn 2 different actions. I still didn't have enough to summon what I needed to summon, so all I really can do is summon this. Moving on with video game news, Microsoft expands its Xbox accessibility support, testing options for games. Arguably, this announcement may be directly to counter advertise against PlayStation putting out some more information about their accessibility controller, which we really have to make a point to mention that they announced that controller for the PlayStation 5, and then basically did nothing else. They have yet to make a good commercial or get any good press release around it. And in the end, I kind of liked the design of the accessibility controller for the PlayStation a little bit better than I like the Xbox one that actually isn't even made by Xbox. Although, in all fairness, software accessibility really should be the focus more of PlayStation and Xbox versus hardware accessibility. Hardware accessibility, you can help a little bit with that, but you're going to very quickly run into people with very individualized needs as far as building custom controllers for that one person. If anything, it probably would make a lot of sense to just have what they call a turtle connector, because it's green, at the back of consoles, and the turtle connector just being a way that you can wire analog inputs, digital inputs into it. It's going a little bit overboard to build a fully finished product that then goes over USB-C to the console. And frankly, you could, with just a simple turtle connector on the back of a console, you could also try to embrace the Raspberry Pi makerspace a little bit more, and everybody who would own a console could then potentially do something like that, even people who are not disabled. So yeah, anyways, this story is the range of testing options for developers to use and made its larger ecosystem more accessible friendly. Is there any real details here? There's a Microsoft Game Accessibility Testing Service that lets devs and publishers test their game's accessibility features. Nearly 120 extra test steps have been added to be used as further criteria, along with another 124 tags to be used as examples. Beyond that, the Xbox app for PC has been given new accessibility settings. Users can now disable background images and animations as a way of reducing visual confusion that could cause disruption, confusion, or irritation. Additionally, the Microsoft Store on the primary Xbox website now allows users to fill games based on their accessibility needs or preferences. In addition to supporting language, it's possible to find titles with extra audio support, for example, or one with visual options like text size or a steady camera. Another change includes a wider range of support for pages for accessibility controllers. The Support Hub was released last year for players to learn about the accessibility features on PC and Xbox consoles, and now covers more than 150 controls for both platforms, including topics such as visual filters and control stick configurations. Let's just look at Microsoft's post here. This is an interesting logo. Is this an open source logo, or is this something just Microsoft has made? Although, perhaps in this case, this is a badly designed logo for video games, because being in a wheelchair is almost certainly the least restricting disability you could have as far as video games, because being wheelchair bound would only inherently mean that you couldn't use your feet to hold your own weight and walk for long periods of time, which are not things that are asked of video game players very much. Yes, you can't play a game like Dance Dance Revolution, I guess, or Wii Yoga, but you're talking maybe a dozen games that use anything involving your feet. Controllers have always been hand-based. So while the wheelchair guy is kind of universally recognized, there would have been room to potentially go with somebody that has more of a hand problem. Of course, if you did hands and they were missing a few fingers, that would be perhaps a little grotesque, and the Japanese would hate that because it would look like the Yakuza's, people who cut off their pinkies. So you couldn't probably go with that. You could go with like maybe a hand where one finger is shorter than the other. But I don't know if that would be particularly iconic as far as a disability. You could go with a full missing hand nub. That probably would be your best bet. But even that would be fairly grotesque. I guess technically you could assume that this rounded point here indicates that it's a nub, but this rounded point doesn't indicate that you're missing toes. So yeah, I would have thought potentially you have a full hand with all four fingers holding the controller here, and then you would have a nub next to it that was just rounded off. And that might be a better logo to get the idea across. Here's another strategy that people play fairly consistently and win fairly well with it. Although they don't tend to do that. They usually attack and then double, then attack, then double, then attack and double, then attack and double. Let's go ahead and activate this just to stop being prompted. So, one of the things I would hope we could see in the future is a default mode when testing on consoles, in which it would just cycle through a lot of different visual settings and accessibility settings when people are doing QA testing. There we got a disconnect that worked in our favor. I don't think that's my network though. I really have had zero network problems ever since I got this new router. Like no weird disconnects, nothing. My Internet of Things devices seem to be working as well as they could be. There's one bulb that's very far away that seems to not get the signals very often. My Christmas lights short-circuited and burned out before that point, and it's very obvious that that was a physical problem and not a network problem causing that. Although it is possible them turning on and turning off caused a problem at some point. It is possible that just turning the brightness down too low caused a problem. An undercurrenting, undervolting caused a problem. But I don't know if that's the case. But yeah, if in the future, just by default, all QA testing was always done with accessibility features flipping every few seconds, every 30 seconds or so. So you'd be in a cutscene and then it would go into, say, larger text or smaller text or higher contrast, lower contrast. That way, that is just a default thing built into all QA testing where they could give feedback there. That would that would be nice, certainly. Otherwise, and it almost has to be like you're going to be forced into this mode when doing QA, using a development board or a development console. Aurora Gaming says hi on the chat. Hi. So yeah, I could, if they forced everybody into that, then it would be a default thing. Otherwise, we're going to constantly just be in the situation where some game developers are not going to care anywhere as much about accessibility, and some game developers are definitely going to care too much about accessibility, but honestly it's better to care too much than too little. Let's go ahead and hit this one and this one. So that's half his life to cancel the destruction of that card. And we'll see what else we can do. Go ahead and take this. Okay. So we'll summon this, activate this. We're activating as much as possible to see if he's going to trigger something. Okay. So that's going to negate all face-up cards. And I assume that means for the rest of the turn, or just forever. That's forever. Okay. So attaching a card to that isn't going to help. Activating this and tossing this. I really should have activated its ability first. Interesting, he's gonna send a 0 attack monster to the graveyard? Just to, once again, don't know if that's going to work out particularly well for me, but we can see here some other icons, and yeah, this might be an interesting, here you have like the I love you sign language. So if you had used that as an icon with a finger missing in the middle, I guess maybe that could have worked. Or here you have, once again, a missing lower leg, which doesn't really affect video gaming. The blind dog potentially could have been a good icon, but that is promising a lot, that someone who is mostly blind or completely blind would be able to play a video game. So as far as icons, which is what's definitely standing out more to my mind, none of these feel quite right as far as trying to have a symbol for disabled gamers. There probably is an organization and a symbol out there that I'm just completely unaware of. I don't think this guy's ability can activate, though. So I could potentially win just by attacking, but if he can stop that in any way... Like, we'll activate this and see if we can undo this. Nope, it didn't work. But a good old-fashioned just summoning and attacking may work. But then you also have like these little stars or plus signs that don't make any sense, and this lightning bolt with different colors. I don't know what that means either. I don't know if these colors mean anything. Maybe this is like a Special Olympics for video gaming logo. You have just a controller here, you have a brain, and then you have ally LA11Y, which maybe that's neuroatypical icons. Which at a certain level, people who are neuroatypical are definitely the target audience as far as disabled gaming. More than anything is that you're going to have a lot of people with ADD, ADHD, and autism, OCD, and what is the reading one too? That dyslexia. Yeah. People with ADD, ADHD, dyslexia, autism, all very likely to play video games in slightly higher numbers and very capable of playing video games in most cases. Of course, somebody with dyslexia is not going to play a visual novel and try and read all that. So, a brain and a controller might make some sense. Here we have some gamer girls, I guess, being used to promote things. Although, noticeably, I don't see anything physically wrong with this gamer girl. I really don't see anything physically wrong with this gamer girl. So I guess here we have some test profiles as to what it really looks like. And some screenshots if you want to check out this article. I'll leave a lot of that for you to check out. Okay. What can we do here? Basically nothing. I can activate this effect and see if that triggers something. Just triggers him canceling that. So you set a monster face down, and I guess if I did that a couple times and he attacked with something very weak, I might be able to win there. Noticeably though, well, this looks like this might be useful for programmers. This doesn't look very useful for actual game people, and this is a different interface than this test interface. It just is all black on black. But yeah, when you look at the other visuals here, showing themes on profiles, showing video previews on hover, disabling background images and disabling background animations, really feels like it is mostly focusing on the audiovisual of the storefront more than actual games. Because that doesn't really feel like things that really would change the in-game options. It would just change how the Xbox Store works. Microsoft is obviously really just trying to make testing services to give game developers tools to focus on accessibility if they want to, but they're not really trying to unify it under one system that would be helpful. Xbox being an accessible device, it falls apart immediately if there isn't a consistent interface in every game, or if you have to go into every game and change the settings one way or the other. Here we can see the Xbox accessibility controller that is not actually made by Microsoft, and I've never seen one of these in the stores. I don't think they are in stores at all, and the price is really high, but not too high considering it's an accessibility device. And it really doesn't deliver much either, because you basically have to buy even more accessories off of the base accessory. You can't really play very many games with the one D-pad and 2 buttons compared to a compared to an Xbox game that needs a ton of buttons. That's one of the problems in particular that's wrong with the Lego DC Supervillains too, is that they've really just finally crossed the line, the straw that broke the camel's back, as far as having too many actions and the buttons just doing too many different things, where tapping B does one thing, whereas holding B does another thing. Tapping X does one thing versus holding X does another thing. Tapping Y does one thing versus holding Y does another thing. Like, they really made the game controls too complicated, when honestly, for a kids game, Lego DC Supervillains should be a lot more like press A when you're next to something to activate something, and if you're not next to anything, you will just jump when you press A. Much closer to the Nintendo mentality back in the day, when the A button does almost everything. And even now, the A button mostly does everything. We have Alter Acolyte, or yeah, I think that's his name on the chat, saying yo. I guess that'll be it for Yu-Gi-Oh! Today. Still working on the World Championships. Didn't make as much progress as I would have liked, or I'm not sure I even went up one rank, but we did win a duel and play more games, and so it may very well be a case that there's just going to be a lot more grind in the last 5 tiers against stronger competitors. And there is definitely an argument to potentially even rebuilding my deck in the middle of this whole competition over the weekend. I probably won't do that. We're almost completely done with this battle pass. Now we have just 10 more ranks, and that'll be that for a couple of months, or a month and a half. So yeah, it's definitely a case that the accessibility stuff should be a major focus in the next consoles, but it should just be a big change there in the next consoles, because trying to cram it into modern consoles, well, nice, just ignores the whole like backwards compatibility issues that you haven't been thought through. Like, a lot of old games are not going to get accessibility features added to them, and arguably what you would want to do is have a big warning screen for any older game that says this game is older and does not support accessibility. And it doesn't even have to be a full screen warning screen. It could really just be something that pops up at the top. This game doesn't support all of your accessibility features. Noticeably though, this whole press release isn't really showing you the details that you really would want to see. It's linking to other links whereas this would probably be the more interesting article. And even in this article, you're not seemingly getting a ton of information. I imagine the real documentation and information for the Microsoft Gaming Accessibility Testing Service is NDA'd and given to only people who are major game developers. In a lot of ways, I do suspect that was an article specifically designed around this article. Sorry, we're jumping around a little bit here. Here's the first look at the user interface for Sony's customizable accessibility controller. Now, at first glance, the picture they had made this controller very confusing because the knob on the left was pointing downward, and they were trying to be artsy-fartsy and have it look downward, which made no sense at all. They obviously have fixed that now, and they've made a much better picture to explain what the accessibility controller is, in the sense that you have a circle here of buttons, which, in fairness, might make it fairly hard to hit all of these buttons, particularly if you have accessibility problems. But by making a circle of buttons, you can put the controller on the other side, I would assume, and just flip things around upside down and left and right, because if this push this way is going up, if you rotated it 90 degrees, it would actually then be down, and if pushing this direction in this orientation is left, rotate that 90 degrees, it would be going right instead. Well, does that part flip? If you're going here and pushing that way outward and you rotate it, yeah, it would be flipping that too. So yeah, you would have to flip both the X and Y axes to rotate it. And then there is just this kind of idea of hovering your hand in the middle here to hit all of the buttons, which again, this gets down to the point of there being too many buttons on modern controllers in general. But there's a wide accessibility variety here of different types of buttons too. Some that scoop up very wide, some that you can hover over and potentially hit two buttons at the same time, some that are just directly connected as two buttons being hit at the same time. And then you have a collection of labels, so once you've got it all set up, you can label it correctly. I think they also have some blanks here to cover up some parts. You can also change the arcade style ball knob to more of a controller style large analog stick flatter disc type, or even a smaller disc type. So physically, this looks like a much better system than the Xbox One, much more thought out. But they have just not done anything to talk about it so far. So now we are getting the details. They obviously just announced it way too early. If I was going to have a choice, I would definitely buy this controller more than anything. Although, in fairness, you probably wouldn't, if you don't have disability, buy either one, which is a shame, in favor of just buying a fight stick or an arcade emulation type controller, which is basically a fight stick of some sort. Fight sticks will be just as expensive as this controller is, and more laid out in a standard arcade style than this weird art style. Which, it would have been nice if they had figured out a way to design something that looked like a fight stick and could be sold as a fight stick, but also could potentially be accessible in some way. Maybe in the way that it looked like a fight stick, but then you could pop off the buttons on top and connect different accessibility devices to that, or move the orientations of the buttons quite a bit. That is also a good question. A lot of disabled people probably can play on fight sticks fairly well. But yeah, we've got an interface here. It seems to be showing exactly what you would expect. Although, in this interface, if you actually did have like a D-pad up, down, left, and right, or the right analog stick being up, down, left, and right, and then the left analog stick being this, then you're taking up 4 buttons for that immediately. And that is definitely also a problem, is that if you wanted 2 analog sticks that felt very much like the same kind of analog stick, that's not an option here. Whereas it kind of would have made sense if there was an attachment point to put an analog stick right in the middle here, and then you could let go of the analog stick and press the buttons around it. Stick sensitivity and dead zoning. Very basic screenshot there. And that's pretty much all we've got. Is 2 screenshots on this article. No announcement, I think, as far as availability. So this very much could just be vaporware. On the other hand, it would be nice if this worked with other devices easily, which it very well probably will, because it's Bluetooth, I suspect, like the PlayStation controllers. But it would be nice if there was a puck that it connected to and let you stream games to that puck, like the @Legends puck that's available. Here we have another render, and it's slightly tilted in this case, but not anywhere as bad as the original depictions. And this is a better resolution image. You can see in this orientation, though, there is no right analog stick being programmed. Instead, they have put the square and circle and triangle and X buttons in R1 and R2, and then this. So I'd have to assume that the symbol that I can not figure out toggles the left analog stick to be the right analog stick. And who's to say that that would really work? It might work in a lot of games, though, if the right analog stick just stayed exactly in the center and then the left analog stick moved the character. But yeah, inherently there's really no consistency. And these numbers are just for programming, but weird that they're permanently there. But it would have made a lot more sense to have a nice system where it was smooth to look at the top, and then the numbers were on the bottom. The square button is right in the middle, so you have this big 1 button in the middle. So they're calling them pillow button caps, flat button caps, wide flat button caps, which cover 2 button sockets, overhang button caps, which benefit players with smaller hands that position them closer to the center, and curved button caps, which can be pushed if placed along the top or pulled if placed along the bottom of the controller. Let's see. There's an attachment point that I assume this is probably a VESA mount of some sort, unless there is a standard wheelchair style attachment point or accessibility. Which, okay, that's interesting. It also seems like there's probably an attachment point for putting it on something like a tripod. 1024 and 1/4 20 probably are the centimeters or millimeters of the screws. But even in this case, you can see that this attachment ball is only going to be attached in 2 places. So not the most stable connection. You can push it in and out. There's some plugs. This is something they didn't show before, where you can have 4 external things, but these would be analog on and off connections through 3mm mini stereo jack type wire and connectors. This wouldn't be a USB where you could plug in an analog stick or like a Wiimote or something like that. This connector could be a USB though. I'm not sure, it's not really saying. They didn't show this side before. Which I heavily suspect this side didn't exist when they first announced it. PlayStation definitely rushed to announce this accessibility controller, and they were still very late to the party as far as just Microsoft having a full year of good press around it for basically doing nothing, because Microsoft's involvement was very little in their accessibility controller. Here you can see it is programmable for the analog stick to be left or right, up and down orientation, and they might as well call it the turtle when you look at how this interface depicts it. And then you just program all the buttons, and then you assign the center button to do something also. These center assignments, though, are more limited than I would like it to be, because I'd like to think that the center button would have actually been an 8-way tilt button, and that yes, you could treat it as just one big button to press downward, but you could have also used it as the right analog stick. But obviously it's physically not designed that way. Looking at this interface, it's one button and one button only, which I don't know if it's really necessary to have one giant button and then several minimal buttons versus having 3 or 4 buttons of the same size. Really, you should have 4 of the same size buttons, just like the triangle, square, circle, X buttons, or the A, B, X, Y on Microsoft. Even here, when you look at this interface though, you're seeing them show a background image, which is just going to confuse the issue for people who get distracted by backgrounds, if that really is an issue. Arguably, if you're getting distracted by a stationary background while trying to set up your controller for a console, you probably just can't play video games at that point. They are apparently saying that you can combine a regular DualSense, which that's a good thought too, where you could have one good hand that is controlling a regular controller, DualSense, whether it's the left or right hand, and then the other hand could handle the other options. And that takes some programming, certainly. And I don't know if the Xbox accessibility controller can really do that, which Sony may have them beat on that one. Is there anything else worth mentioning here? I don't think so. Let's see, I'm trying to avoid going too far in these tabs, although it really wouldn't probably matter. Rocksteady Games is hiring for art and code jobs, which either means that the Suicide Squad Killed the Justice League still needs some people, or they are planning on having another project work, or being another project is in development. Then the other big news is Mortal Kombat 1 DLC Combat Pack 1 characters have been listed on Amazon Italy, effectively spoiling the announcement for Mortal Kombat 1 reboot. Quan Chi, Omni-Man, Ermac, Peacekeeper, Takeda, and Homelander. And then cameo characters are Trimmer, Johnny Cage, Chameleon, Movado, and Farah. And then a Jean-Claude Van Damme character skin. So, assuming all of those are true, then the rumors of Homelander and Peacemaker seems to be correct. And I think Quan Chi is from Mortal Kombat, but the rest of those characters I think are from something else. Or at least most of them. And there is a real problem here when they say like Trimmer, because there probably is a DC character called Trimmer, but there might be a character called Trimmer in the Mortal Kombat universe too. So, yep. I guess we just have to leave it at that and assume Mortal Kombat is one, and assume, or at least assume there's a high chance, because of the vast amount of rumors, that Mortal Kombat 1 is real and that this is actually the DLC characters. It does give us a slight inside look into what DLC might be, as far as giving you characters that I assume will not be as good as the main game characters, because it's a fighting game. Hopefully they wouldn't be better. And then we could maybe assume that this is the logo for Mortal Kombat 1, which is not a terrible logo, perhaps a little bit too colorful for its own good. That's not really the information though that I'd be too interested in as far as the Mortal Kombat reboot. I'm much more interested in just what are the gameplay modes going to be. And then moving on, Video Games Chronicle says Zelda Tears of the Kingdom's first patch fixes a main quest progression bug, and several other issues were addressed in a new update. So apparently there was players could not clear main quest the closed door even if they fulfilled the condition to advance the quest. If you've already encountered this issue, you'll be able to clear the quest by downloading this update data. So yeah, didn't seem like that bug was affecting everybody, or maybe just most players haven't gotten to that point in the game, because otherwise you would not be getting perfect scores and no complaints at all around Tears of the Kingdom. And then 3 more Super Mario Advance games are coming to Nintendo Switch Online. These might be the last of the Super Mario Advance games, though. And it's Super Mario Advance, Super Mario World, Yoshi's Island. These are all like Super NES games that were then remade or ported to Game Boy Advance. The question this brings up in my mind, though, is if they make a Switch 2, they probably, Nintendo, if they're smart, needs to include a free year of online service, because their online service isn't that good, or make their online service considerably better by including all of the games that they've already done. But that's pretty much all they've already done anyway, so that doesn't make it any better. Yeah, they really are painted in the corner that if you buy a Switch 2, you basically need to get a free year of the Nintendo online service, including all of the NES and Super NES and Game Boy Advance games that they've released, with more games being released. I could see Nintendo going the other direction and just saying, hey, we're going to get rid of the cost on our online service, and we're going to just make our online service basically be non-existent for any game that wants to have online. They're just going to have to pay Nintendo or run their own servers. And then the eShop, I could see them just abandoning the idea of the eShop completely, or making the eShop part of an online service free for everybody. And then the Nintendo games, I could see them making that free also. It would be a smart move if all of a sudden you got a year, if you got all these old NES games, Super NES games, for free when you bought a Switch 2, and didn't have to pay a monthly service, which, yeah, that would, Nintendo basically needs to clean the board and start over and rethink how they particularly are going to do their online services, because they just don't have good offerings. And even though they're not asking a lot of money, they are asking money, and that's still a problem. And then finally, Resident Evil 4's Ashley is still kind of a fan as far as cosplay. Here we have a cosplayer doing the modern Ashley in a coat with the orange sweater underneath, and being tied up in kind of shibari bondage, which I doubt actually happens in Resident Evil 4. And then you can see she's wearing a skirt and thighs and leggings and boots. And then it's also tied up here, just sitting in a leather chair within what looks like a game background behind that. And then it says like Leon help. Inherently, this is a problem with Ashley as a character, though, is unless they had completely rewritten her and made her much more involved and much more empowered, she was always going to be a damsel in distress character, which then leaves her to be a very shallow character, and very shallow characters are going to be very welcoming towards people inserting their own fan fiction and lewd storylines into the character, and just kind of looking at the character as a potential romance character, or just with a lewd gaze. They used to say male gaze, but honestly lewd gaze is probably a better phrase, or lewd eye might even be a better phrase, because gaze is not really even a great G-A-Z-E is what I'm saying. It's not a common word to use. So yeah, if they really wanted to fix Ashley as a character, she needed to be a lot more empowered. When you first save her, she finds a gun. Leon teaches her how to shoot the gun. That would have been a nice storyline element there. It's probably you give her some weak little handgun to protect herself with, and then she just doesn't get captured as much as possible. I wouldn't say turn her into like Shiva and have her be a co-op partner that's following you around shooting zombies all the time, but it wouldn't hurt for her to not have to just hide in trash bins. And frankly, you could almost have it both ways, where she gets captured a lot, but still tries to fight off and defend herself. Just don't make her a weak teenager as the president's daughter, which is really what she had. Arguably, if they had just made her look younger, the story probably would have worked a lot better too. If you clearly had made Ashley look like a 8 to 12-year-old instead of making her look like a 16 to 20-year-old, then the maiden in distress part would have worked a lot better. And honestly, the story would have worked a lot better if she was just getting grabbed and dragged off, and she was a little kid and they were infecting her with Las Plagas. Of course, the problem with that is that they, canonically in Resident Evil 4, all the kids died of the Las Plagas, and that's why there's no children zombies anywhere in the game. But you could have certainly crossed that line, certainly, nowadays. It wouldn't have been that controversial to have zombie kids running around. It still probably would have been too controversial for Capcom, though. Shooting kids in the face would be too much. Firmament from Cyan Worlds, the makers of Myst, is out now. Unfortunately, we can see the initial 74 reviews are only giving it a 64%. Which, that is definitely the danger, is that Myst and even Abduction kind of set a high bar, and Abduction really didn't reach that high bar as far as the original Myst and the fandom and nostalgia around that. And so we can't play any of these videos. Still very weird how some videos play and some videos don't. But yeah, the makers of Myst were people who programmed with Apple, like PowerPoint type software, decades and decades ago. The new people that are making games at Myst are a whole new generation. And while the old people may still have some of the ideas, the new people have to implement those ideas or overrule those ideas, and arguably maybe overruling the ideas is the right way. Myst as a series, or Myst 1 and Myst 2 Riven, very much are flash in the pan open world puzzle games that you just can't really recreate. And that seems like that is the case, which is a sad thing, because it would be nice if Firmament did come hot off the presses and got a perfect score and was potentially the second game this year that was actually worth talking about, versus all the buggy games that have been released. It's probably not the second game of the year. Resident Evil 4 also came out this year, but we've had a lot of really bad games, and very quickly they disappear. Nobody's talking about, I want to say Remedy was the name of it, but that's not the name. Nobody's talking about the Microsoft zombie game, vampire game, whatever it's called. I can't even remember the name. Moving on to the regular news, since I'm moving fairly slowly here. The GTA publisher says that groundbreaking games will drive a big jump in sales the next fiscal year. Take-Two says titles will set new standards in their industry, which promises a lot, so hopefully they deliver on some of that. Inherently, Grand Theft Auto games and Rockstar games in general have been fairly lackluster, in that we had the GTA trilogy debacle, that wasn't made by Rockstar, but still. We've had GTA Online being very focused on, Red Dead Redemption having its online elements very much focused on. We haven't had major focus or any real indication that they even intend on making a GTA 6 that is going to be more of a single player experience. And even if they did make a GTA 6, I'm not sure that they can break enough ground to make it sell well, because it's been a long time since GTA 5 came out, and games have evolved, and I just don't know if GTA as a series can evolve with it. I would say there's as likely, if not more of a chance, that the next GTA game will feel very much like the reboot of Saints Row, in that it will just try to be a completely different game with completely different types of characters. The new episodes of Sonic Prime will arrive on Netflix in July. We already talked about mid-generation console refreshes. We already talked about the accessibility kit. I guess they were calling it Project Leonardo before. And now it's called the Access Controller. Which, okay, I guess it has a name. And they did a big announcement to show off the menu and the name. Speaking of Leonardo, my favorite mobile game, Destiny Child, the three main assistant characters you get at the beginning of the story are called Mona, Lisa, and Davy. And I have to admit my ignorance. I never realized that it was a pun of Leonardo da Vinci in the Mona Lisa painting. Davy is Da Vinci shortened, basically. But the characters look nothing like the Mona Lisa or anything like that, so that makes sense. Also, they're called Mona Lisa and Davy in English, and it's a Korean game that has also been translated to Japanese, so it's in part probably not the same kind of pun in the original Korean. Speaking of mobile games, I was advertised Star Trek Lower Decks on my mobile phone, and I installed that. And I'm probably going to get bored of that fairly quickly, just because of the long wait times. I like actually the story and the narrative that's going on, so if I ever could watch Star Trek Lower Decks without paying for a Paramount Plus streaming service, I might actually watch that. Lower Decks is an animated comedy of a bunch of incidents in Star Trek times, Next Generation or slightly after that times. But because the stories go forward only when you've accomplished goals, and the goals get exponentially longer and more difficult, you're going to have one chapter of the story completed every few days, potentially even after a week or two, and so you're going to forget the narrative of the story, and there's no way to get any kind of like backstory and see previously completed episodes, it seems like, or even get backstories on the characters, so I'm very much in the dark. I also played Monopoly Go on my phone for about 4 hours until I said, yeah, this is not going to matter enough that I would want to play it. So I am now sadly up to like 4 mobile games instead of playing PC games and making YouTube content. And so, yeah, I need to get rid of 1 game or 2. Marvel Snap I'm still wasting time on. The Goblins and Miners game I'm still wasting time on. Moving on with the news, though, you can see here that Metro Last Light will be free on Steam for next week. Players can claim the game between then. This would be kind of a great point potentially to make a YouTube short in a different style. Noticeably though, Video Games Chronicle is not listing a link to Metroid Last Light. So I'd have to come over here, right click this, search this, do this, click this. So right now the game is $3.99, and so I'm going to have to potentially just keep that open until it becomes free. Which means I should come back here to the history, recently closed tabs, and that. There you go. And we'll leave that tab open. We'll use that as a barrier to remind me as to why I'm looking at Metroid Last Light. So the yeah, I potentially should make a new YouTube short that says free Steam game alert and see if that works any differently. But frankly, that would be a lot of work. And then I would effectively be making a YouTube short to tell somebody something fairly quickly. Perhaps instead I should make a YouTube post on my channel and see if that would work any better. Although I don't think posts get shown to anybody other than people who are already subscribed to my channel. Whereas if I made it a YouTube short, it would be shown to random people. So I really should make a YouTube short. I did notice on the YouTube Studio there is a whole section now for podcasts too. They really are pushing podcasts. That being said, also YouTube seems to be moving towards 30-second long ads, replacing 2 15-second long ads, and showing potentially ads when you pause on YouTube TV, which that's a major no-no in my book. If you're pausing the TV, all video and audio needs to pause, because you could be taking a phone call, there could be an emergency. The idea of an ad showing is completely unacceptable. Even if it was like a slight video ad that was playing no audio, that's unacceptable, because then you couldn't pause and like look at that one frame that you're trying to see. Not that any streaming service is really good about rewinding or framing forward by 1 or 2. Man, it is raining really hard outside. So, yeah, I could see maybe when you pause, it actually pauses, and then when you unpause, you get an ad. But that seems kind of unfair, too. You know, trying to cram in more and more ads is just not acceptable to most people. Moving on, as far as Video Games Chronicle articles, we really don't have that many at the moment. Take-Two says it's not seeing pushback from players on $70 pricing. In all fairness, I'm not seeing it either. It seems like video game consumers in general are suckers, or it's probably more accurate to say there is a large amount of, I imagine, particularly PC gamers and Steam gamers, who have long since established that they were never going to buy AAA games at full price during that initial launch window anyways, and they were going to wait till a Steam sale. And so, let's say there are, let's just for a round number, let's say there are a billion gamers out there, people that just in a year actively buy at least one video game. Of that billion people, I suspect that PC gamers on Steam are probably at least half of that, and were never affecting the sales in the launch window at this point. For probably 5 to 10 years, it's been that way. And the people who are buying games at the full price during launch window, pre-ordering games, I think those are just the suckers that will inevitably be willing to pay any price whatsoever. And it is perhaps a catch-22, because I imagine Take-Two, even if they were getting harassed like crazy by people on Twitter, they would just say, oh, those are trolls, and we don't see that in our numbers. Even if they were getting properly boycotted by gamers and their sales were down, I imagine Take-Two would still say that they're not seeing that. We might get a very different story if they were being properly boycotted. When they have to do a shareholders meeting, they might say, oh, actually we did see some pushback at that point. But right now it just behooves them to say they're not seeing any pushback. Particularly also Take-Two games are the kinds of games that just would not really not be purchased at $70. They only are making a few games, and they're pretty big games. And they've only released a few games at $70 too, so it's very early. I think people may get tired of the $70 price tag a year later, after it's too late. Let's see. Mortal Kombat 1 apparently was announced with a September release with the first trailer. A console beta for the series reboot will be available in August. This does look like this is the official artwork. So let's see what the trailer looks like. Mature 17 plus. Are we going to see any actual in-game cutscenes here, or are we just going to, in-game footage versus cutscenes? Because I assume this is just a cutscene. And if anything, I'm already concerned as far as what this looks like, because this does not look like the types of things you really need to focus on in a fighting game. Big fields with high visual texture on the grass, or massive amounts of people in the background, or high texture on the fabrics in the faces. Like, this is all nice as far as the outfits and the faces, I'll say, but all the detail in the background is really just going to be a problem to render in the actual game, or a distraction visually in the background. It does seem like they are probably establishing a smaller cast of characters that kind of is explainable. 2 or 3 characters from different groups and friends and family. Not giant numbers of characters from other realms that were added later, and not even like Mortal Kombat 2 characters. Noticeably, we're not seeing like a Sonya Blade or anything like that. But see, if this is how a fatality looks, that it turns into this weird cutscene that doesn't have a fixed visual aspect, that would be weird. So I assume none of that is in-game footage. I just have to assume none of that is. And hopefully I don't get content ID'd for an uncopyrightable advertisement for showing that. Yeah. Liu Kang, Scorpion, Sub-Zero, Raiden, Kung Lao, Katana, Melina, Shang Tsung, Johnny Cage, and many others. Pre-order now to get things. $70 for the standard edition pre-order, $110 for the premium edition, or $250 for the collector's edition. Again, I'm a little concerned as far as what that shows, because that is not focusing in on what a fighter game should be focused on. And you do have that problem where if you're going to get this in Evo as a game that professional fighters are going to play, they're going to want to see what the game looks like in play, in game mechanics, and eventually they will show that, I'm sure. But they're not going to care about the fancy graphics or the visuals. If you're not interested in this being a fighting game that stays around for a long time and is played by professional fighters at Evo, then you're just making a generic fighting game for generic gamers, and your sales probably will reflect that if you do that in a negative way, because generic gamers don't really play fighting games. Even Mortal Kombat may be too not big enough to make that sense. Here we can see a comparison. In 1992 it's launched and it's sold over 80 million games, but that is throughout its entire series. 12 million was the latest mainline game in 2019, Mortal Kombat 11. So it's really not the biggest of numbers as far as games go. They're not even really focusing that much on gore, and that will be a delicate problem certainly as the graphics get better in general. Even if you're not focusing on visual graphics, the goriness is just going to get gory. The only thing they could have really done to maybe account for that is to make a remake that was a flat 2D cartoony looking game, which that wouldn't really feel true to Mortal Kombat if it was very colorful and cartoony. Even this logo is too colorful for its own good. Let's see. Moving on, Xbox has launched its first game on GeForce Now. Gears 5 will be followed by Deathloop, Grounded, and Pentiment next week. GeForce Now is part of, I guess, its 10-year partnership with NVIDIA streaming service to play games on PC instead of installing them locally on your PC, which I'm not sure how many people really benefit from a service like that. It's a lot like Stadia, where you would have to have a pretty weak video card, but not such a weak video card that streaming still wouldn't be a problem. And then you have to have a very good internet connection, and you still probably have to have a pretty good CPU, at least mediocre. I really don't think I could build a $400, $300 micro ATX computer that was just really underpowered, or get something that was like a underpowered i3 Intel laptop and play GeForce Now at a comfortable frame rate. If it did work on really underpowered stuff or really old stuff, that would be different, but I don't think I've seen anybody try that. Plus, the lineup on GeForce Now, I imagine, is not as big as you'd like it to be. The mystery game on the Epic Games Store is Death Stranding. I feel like they've already given away Death Stranding. It was also given away for 24 hours on Christmas. So yeah. And Epic Mega Sale has also launched with that mystery game giveaway, so I guess they're trying to do a store sale, Steam sale competition. Let's see. Lords of Fallen has been dated with new gameplay trailer. Don't care about their podcast. We already talked about the Game Boy Advanced games. Super Mario movie looks to be released digitally next week in the UK. Star Wars Jedi Survivor topped European game sales in April. I talked about the first patch for Tears of the Kingdom. Sega has announced the Sonic Symphony World Tour concert series. Celebrating over 30 years of Sonic music, the tour will start with London and LA shows. I assume that this is a collection of live performers. Yeah. Music will be performed by a full symphony orchestra and rock band to be the backdrop of iconic moments of the series being played on the big screen, which implies to me that the rock band and full symphony will be different in LA versus London, and they will just be hiring people around the world, which they probably have already hired all the people, and that they've been practicing for 6 months to a year to do this. That being said, you'd have to probably be a huge Sonic fan to really want to go to that. Little kids might be interested in that, but little kids also probably wouldn't recognize a lot of the iconic imagery being put on the background, and I'd arguably question how much iconic imagery they really even have to show. I barely would suggest going to see a rock band or orchestra or both doing video game music in general. That kind of works if you can cherry pick the best of the best, most recognizable songs from multiple video games. But when you limit yourself down to just Sonic stuff, like I can only probably recognize the Green Hill Zone song and maybe a few other levels of Sonic 1, and that's about it. Like, I don't think there's going to be anything else amazing. And honestly, if I was even going to start to think of just general game songs, it's like Green Hill Zone for Sonic, Super Mario Brothers main recognizable soundtrack, Still Alive from Portal. There's probably some Final Fantasy songs that people would recognize, but I wouldn't personally recognize. There is decent music in a lot of games, but video game music is usually designed to be very forgettable in background, which is the exact opposite of what you would want in a show or concert. So yeah, there's nothing off the top of my head that I would say that's an amazing song that I'd really want to hear. And I think that bears out in the fact that very few people actually buy soundtracks around video game music. It's just not designed to be that way. I suppose it is worth mentioning here that the leaked DLC characters were not mentioned in the announcement, so they're only just announcing the original characters, not any of the DLC. And then our last Video Games Chronicle article for today says Jim Ryan says it is too early to judge the PlayStation VR 2's popularity, which is him just covering for the fact that it has not sold well, which is not surprising considering it is extremely expensive and there really is just not a good lineup of new games to compel you to buy the PlayStation VR 2. Notably, it is $550 to purchase the VR2, on top of which you still have to plug it into a PlayStation 5. It does not plug in to a PC, and there's not an accessory to make it plug into a PC at this moment. Moving on to the Gematsu articles, Guilty Gear Strive DLC character Asuka R hashtag or R pound and Season Pass 3 have been announced. So, Guilty Gear, being a fighting game that can be more cartoony, is taking an opportunity to make some announcements at the same time as the announcements of Mortal Kombat 1, and that very possibly is intentional on one side's intent or the other. Maybe Guilty Gear always planned to make this announcement and then Mortal Kombat stole the thunder, or vice versa. Of course, also decent chance that some people, a lot of fighter people, like Guilty Gear and don't like Mortal Kombat, or like Mortal Kombat and don't like Guilty Gear. Sword Art Online Integral Factor is coming to PC. It's currently available for iOS and Android, which definitely creates a situation where it might be late to the party if it's an MMO. It doesn't actually look like an MMO though. Yeah, it is. So, yeah. You definitely would be playing catch up to start playing it on PC. That is an interesting question. If I was to stop playing a collectible card game during these live streams and play an MMO, would that work? I imagine no, it wouldn't. It would be too grindy, and it would take even more time. I really want to take less time, not more. And frankly, I find collectible card games slower paced enough that it makes more sense to play them. I would like to find an even slower paced CCG, but Yu-Gi-Oh's fairly popular. My Hero Ultimate Rumble for PS4 has an open beta test set for May 25th to June 1st. This is the My Hero Academia anime manga series, although they may have dropped Academia at some point. You may have gotten graduated. The My Hero series seems to be very popular, and I think part of the reason here is that they introduce more of an almost X-Men style collection of heroes instead of focusing only on a Goku Gohan in Dragon Ball, which there were a lot of other fighters in Dragon Ball, but by the time you get to Dragon Ball Z, and even in Dragon Ball, the original series, it really was solely focused on Goku Gohan. Macros Shooting Insight adds a PlayStation 5 version, and its story has been detailed. I assume this is based off of the Macros anime series that was chopped up to make the Robotech cartoon series in the West. Let's see. Tokyo Game Show 2023 has its main visual unveiled. They consistently, over the past few years that I've been paying attention to the Tokyo Game Show, have had just generic controllers and devices, and if anything this year they are focusing more on a colorful red and green color palette with some Asian inspired looking characters. Noticeably that they're not defaulting to a PlayStation controller outfit, DualShock style controller, and instead just making a generic controller. And there's focus on mobile gaming a little bit more. Yep. Looks like there's even a focus of VR in the background. I wish I could make this picture a little bit bigger to see. But yeah, the Tokyo Game Show really doesn't have to do anything with their visuals other than just not offend. And that's basically what they're trying for. This year's theme, I guess, is Games in Motion, the World in Revolution. And I assume they mean actually revolving, not overturning governments. Do I expect there to be a lot of announcements of games this year at the Tokyo Game Show? Not really. There tends not to be a lot. The illustrator for this image was Kuka, and this is the 4th year they've been doing this art. Tokyo Game Show doesn't tend to really actually announce a lot of even Japanese games, because Japanese game publishers just announce games whenever. So it is almost more of a like token event for fans to go to, as much as it is a trade event for people to game developers to go to, which is fine. That may benefit them a lot since E3 is now effectively dead. Tokyo Game Show, I don't think gives away awards or has an award show. If they streamed an award show and just live translated to English, they could probably get a lot more attention. I'm not sure they want the attention from the outside world or the Western world, though. But yeah, there's not as many announcements during the Tokyo Game Show as you would think, or awards or presentations or anything. If anything, I mostly just see a lot of Japanese people cosplay. This might be a big Tokyo Game Show in particular because of pandemic restrictions finally being lifted in Japan. I think they were finally lifted. So you might see people coming back in larger numbers, but I wouldn't be surprised if that's not really the case. Dragon Quest X Offline expansion, The Sleeping Hero and the Guiding Ally, details the Battle Phantasm max level trials and new moves. If you want to check that out on Gamatsu.com. A game called Gibbon Beyond the Trees is coming to the PS4 and 5 on June 1st. It was previously released for the Switch, PC, and Apple Arcade. So let's see how popular this was. I know there was a game where you played as I guess gorilla is what it was, and it was very unpopular, where this Gibbon game I don't recognize. That being said, obviously I put it on the following list, so you can see it's 94% positive, so let's put it on the wish list. And I do think it deserves another YouTube short, or it's probably its first YouTube short, because it's being released on a new platform. Don't think there's any reason to go over this again, just because Gamatsu has a similar article. They seem to have the exact same press packet release of images that Video Games Chronicle did. It says it's coming out to Steam and the Epic Games Store as far as Mortal Kombat 1 goes, but I'm not sure there's a big reason why I would be hyped enough around Mortal Kombat 1 to try and play it anytime soon. Like, I honestly didn't even have the old Mortal Kombat games on my short list of games I wanted to play. I don't know if I even own any of them. As far as the idea of potentially getting into fighting games, Mortal Kombat really would have just been something I would have spotlight or played very quickly and not put a lot of time into. Lords of the Fallen launches October 13th. The Famitsu sales for the 8th through the 14th have been updated, putting Tears of the Kingdom in first place by far, selling 1,119,502 units, versus Mario Kart 8 in the second place, selling only 9,794 units. So effectively, everybody in Japan that had a Switch bought Tears of the Kingdom. And that is a big amount. And very quickly, in this first week alone, Tears of the Kingdom has gotten about a fifth of the lifetime sales of Mario Kart 8. Which, that is the power of being hyped. There's nothing new as far as new games. Even in the top 10, otherwise, Dragon Quest Treasures is on the 20th spot, selling only 1,519 units. And with such massive sales of that, you would expect massive sales increase of Switch hardware, which is kind of hard to tell. There could be about 15,000 extra Switch OLED models that were sold this week, would be my guess at most. Because it has never been super close. The OLED model almost always outsells the PlayStation 5 model, but the PlayStation 5 is selling fairly well and catching up to lifetime sales of the OLED model. Although in all fairness, when you start adding the Switch Lite and the Switch original together, the lifetime sales are blowing PlayStation 4 and 5 out of the water, even if you combine PS4 and the digital PS5 versions, and everybody is blowing Xbox out of the water as far as weekly and lifetime sales. It is, I suppose, possible that Nintendo is going to try with their next console, the Switch 2 or whatever it's called, to effectively have a light version be the original version that's announced, and then do a updated version later that would be like the original Switch, and then do an OLED third tier upgraded version much later. I don't know if that would be your best bet, but yeah, I could see the idea of getting rid of the idea of the light version and instead having a 2024 version, a 2025 version, and a 2026 version, and then go more with the cell phone mentality of every year there being a slightly improved Nintendo console that still plays all the same games. It better have backward compatibility with Switch games, though. If it doesn't, that would be crazy. Even if it was cheap, I don't think people would buy it at that point. Moving on, Monochrome Mobius, Rights and Wrongs Forgotten for the PS5 and PS4 launches September 5th in North America and September 8th in Europe. Which, what kind of game is it? A JRPG. Let's see. Let's jump in here quickly just to see if we can get some visuals of what it looks like. Yep, looks like it's a big open world JRPG, team-based, turn-based stuff. Okay. I think I generally got what that is. Never Awake for Xbox Series launches June 29th alongside a large-scale update. What is the large-scale update? It's first launched on Steam. You can see that was September 28th, 2022. And for that time, it's barely over the 30 reviews necessary to put it on the wish list, but it is. What is the large-scale update, though? The large-scale update will add new weapons and accessories in collaboration with famous indie games, a speedrun mode, and more. Publisher Phoenix and developer Neotro announced. So, interesting. They seem to be willing to change quite a bit, which I guess is fair. I mean, when you only have 90 people willing to review your game on Steam, it's not like you have an established fan base that's going to be upset if you did make big changes. Hopefully they don't make it worse. S Chatos for PS4 and Switch limited physical print editions have been announced. I have no idea what S Chatos is, but I assume it's a shoot 'em up. Yep, it is. Guess we can see if we can get a general idea. Yeah, just a shoot 'em up game. Wobble Dogs is coming to the PS4 and Xbox One on May 23rd. Noticeably, that's yet another game that is already on PlayStation. So we're still seeing a lot of separation here. Wobble Dogs is a single player game where you have mutating dogs. I just don't think I like the visuals here, even though this is overwhelmingly positive. If I'm going to play a game with dogs in it, I don't want them to not look like dogs. So I'm going to make a personal decision there to say no to Wobble Dogs. Which doesn't mean I shouldn't make a YouTube short around it, though. So we'll do that. The Case of the Golden Idol is coming to the Switch on May 25th, due alongside downloadable content The Spider of Lanka. Which, yeah, we're increasingly seeing games that were on Steam or some other console just coming to other consoles. Which I guess is about the only thing we can... I don't even need to put this on the follow list, it's already overwhelmingly positive. It is a weird looking game, certainly, with its visuals. I guess that's all we can hope for at this point, since AAA games are just failing us so terribly. A survival horror puzzle game from Game Grumps called Homebody launches June 1st for the PS5, Xbox Series, PS4, Xbox One, Switch, and PC. This would be probably the second or third game from Game Grumps. Which, if anything, I guess Game Grumps has been the best at making kind of games they want to make that are weird without going super crazy on this. We have yet to see Video Game Donkey's game come out and be reviewed, but we are seeing a slow growing process where people become successful by being a YouTuber and playing video games, and they start to actually make video games. Yeah, Dream Daddy, Dad Rector's Cut is the only other articles here with Game Grumps in the name. So yeah, Dream Daddy, definitely a weird game, but it was a game I think that the actual people that made it had passion, and Aaron of Game Grumps really just funded. And you look at this, and it looks somewhat visually polished, and more than you would assume from like a horror asset flip game, and that's what I suspect it isn't actually a horror asset flip game. It may not be anything as unique as Dream Daddy. Dream Daddy basically being a gay guy, or gay dad's dating simulator visual novel. This is more ambitious, and they're taking their time too, because like there's not a whole bunch of them. Well, what's interesting here is there's more games than I would have thought. What did I just click on? Rogue Games. No, I clicked on Game Grumps and it took me to Rogue Games. This is the developer hijacking problem on Steam in a nutshell, is that the publisher of any game can hijack a developer's name and take it to the publisher's page. So now they are showing me games that Game Grumps really has no connection to at all. The publisher just has connection to it. And then that's something Steam really needs to address. When you click on something, and you should go to a page that you're expecting, not some random page or a different page. So yeah, I don't really have a way to even get to Dream Daddy Dating Simulator from here. It's not going to show up due to the algorithm because the tags won't be the same. There's no reviews for a product that's not out yet. There's no link to it in the description. Alright, well, just put Homebody on the follow list, or make sure it is on the follow list already. And then just leave it at that. Move on. I suppose even if there were multiple YouTubers, if PewDiePie started to fund better games versus the game that was released around him, one or two games around him, that, and say Captain Sparkles started to fund more games, or I don't know if Captain Sparkles really has funded any games other than just Minecraft server mods and things like that. But even if you got like the top 10, 20 people and they were all funding games, it really wouldn't be that many more games coming out, and they would all be still very much niche things. We may see a trend at some point though, where you start to see successful YouTubers pushing the game industry into making more weird games or smaller games, if they get to sales, which maybe they will, maybe they won't. In a lot of ways though, even if successful YouTubers did start to shift the momentum as far as how the game industry works and what kind of games are being made, I feel like there would just be a lot of pushback and a lot of sticking your heads in the sand type mentality from AAA publishers and developers. The likes of Take-Two and EA and Ubisoft almost certainly would not adapt and embrace the idea that Game Grumps was putting out 2 or 3 really good games that were competing against Assassin's Creed and potentially stealing sales away from Assassin's Creed, which Assassin's Creed games are probably a great example of your generic, we're going to make a different game every year that's exactly the same or almost exactly the same. Although EA is an even better example of just NFL 22 versus NFL 23. Moving on, Bleak Sword DX launches June 8th. It's a lo-fi fantasy, dark fantasy action game. It's coming out on Steam. I'll make a YouTube short around that. Slayer's X Terminal Aftermath Vengeance of the Slayer launches June 1st for Xbox Series, Xbox One, and PC. Also available via Xbox Game Pass. I don't think there's anything here that looks particularly interesting. And yeah, that puts me in this weird position. How much do I want to curate a YouTube short? Because my first instinct is to not even make a YouTube short around it, but my second instinct is that YouTube shorts don't really matter, so make one around almost everything. A game called Knock, N-O-C-K, for the PlayStation VR 2 launches May 25th. It's a bow and arrow soccer game by the description. See if we can get a general idea of what you're doing. Okay. So it's soccer like the car game was soccer, except for you're using bows and arrows, which if this wasn't in VR it would look way better, and it would be much more likely that you could find somebody else to play against you versus just playing against the computer. Also, if it wasn't in VR, it would make a lot more sense that you're going to run around. That definitely feels like a game where you're going to end up falling over because you're going to forget that you're in VR and start walking forward normally. Let's see, a game called Oblivion Override launches in early access on June 14th. It's a side-scrolling roguelite robot combat action game. Yeah. Let's check out the Steam page. Yeah. Hack and slash side-scrolling game. Okay. Looks good enough for a follow. ED0 Zombie Uprising pre-orders are now available. This was kind of the weird game, Japanese game, where you're fighting a bunch of zombies in the Edo period of Japan as 3 different kinds of characters. They're saying it's a roguelike game. You can see in the last 30 days, though, it's gotten 10 reviews that are mostly negative, and overall it's at 72%, which is not super positive. It's in early access at the moment, and maybe they abandoned the early access, but I can't really guarantee that that's the case, or maybe they just haven't improved the early access much. There's a possibility that this game is good, but I wouldn't put a lot of faith into it, considering they went the route of early access for a single player game. And as a Japanese company in particular, to make a Japanese game and come out in early access is to really buck the trend of having a finished product, whether it's a good quality product or not, when you launch. So yeah, I can't put a lot of faith in the ED0, and since they're just announcing pre-orders, I'm not going to do a YouTube short around that a second time. Apparently Power Wash Simulator DLC SpongeBob SquarePants Special Pack has been announced, which I guess is just walking around Bikini Bottom while playing Power Wash Simulator and power washing things. Power Wash Simulator, overwhelmingly positive. The thing here is if there's DLC announced, but the DLC is not on Steam, then I probably shouldn't make a short around it, because that's going to be confusing. So going forward, if there are DLC parts, it's going to have its own Steam page, and then I'll have to see if my macro can even make a YouTube short from a DLC page. It probably can just fine. But yeah, just promoting a game because it has DLC a second time is going to be confusing. The game called Maquette, I assume is how you pronounce that, Maquette, for Switch, launches May 25th. It's a first-person recursive puzzle game. Let's see. Yeah, I remember this game. I really wanted to like this game, but you can see it's pretty mixed on its reviews. People aren't loving it. And by recursive, they mean you will basically see a environment, and let's see, what's the best example here. These aren't even really good screenshots for explaining what it is. This is the only one that even makes sense. So you'll see like a scale model of the environment that you need to cross, and then you'll have a regular size key, and you'll put the regular size key on the scale model to make a bridge, and then you'll turn around, and then the scale model and the key will actually have affected the real world that you're interacting with, so that there will be a giant key then that you can use as a bridge. And this game is on the wish list, but not well received, and the Switch version probably isn't going to help that much. Wizard of Legend 2 has been announced for PC. It's being developed by the Children of Morta studio Dead Mage, which I may have to do a little research as far as what is Wizard of Legend 1, but if anything it looks like it's a fast-paced roguelite game. Maybe because it's a roguelite I really wouldn't want to play it, but I'll think about that later. Being published by Humble Games. The cartoon dungeon crawler #Blood is going to be published by Humble Games, so obviously there was some kind of announcement from Humble Games. We really didn't have a large amount of cartoony like games after Cuphead. There's one, maybe two games that tried to copy that art style, and this is probably the first game I've seen where somebody said, hey, if we can copy old Mickey Mouse Disney type art styles, why don't we also copy some of the Nickelodeon 90s era cartoon styles too. These Nickelodeon's era 90s era animations is what I'd call this. Work fairly well. If anything, it is a Western version on Moe or Chibi, and that they anthropomorphically are not in any way accurate. Giant heads, giant eyes. Yeah. So that's kind of somewhat timeless in its own unique style. I guess we put this on the fall list. How many games do we think Humble Games announced? Well, they also announced a 2D action game called Breeze in the Clouds, as far as a game they're going to publish. What's funny about this is if Humble Games was going to make a big announcement, it kind of feels like there should have been a whole video presentation around that, and that they should have tried to do something like a Nintendo Direct. And yet, I don't recall them making any announcement for any kind of Humble Direct type event. Right now, Humble Games are on sale, which I guess we could see what games are actually available for purchase right now. Signalis, Unpacking, Tim, Hat in Time, Wizard of Legend. We'll check that later in a second. Yeah, a lot of these games seem like they're 50% off, but they're still pretty expensive. And kind of noticeably, they don't have that many games for them to have their own separate publisher sale. But they seem to have enough. These individualized publisher sales, though, never stand up as well as the Steam summer sales and winter sales. And I wonder if there is perhaps contractual obligations with Valve and Steam to not undercut the summer sales. Let's see. Wizard of Legend 1 looks like this, which is a bit more pixely. You can see it's very positive from May 15th, 2018, and it is on my wish list. Right. game called Superland 6 Inches Under is now available for the PS5, PS4, Xbox Series, Xbox One, and is coming to the Switch in this summer. It launched on PC in July of 2022. So, this is yet another game that's on my wish list. This was the weird, like, blue character, stick figure characters. Was this a multiplayer game? No. Yep. They say it's a mix between Portal, Zelda, and Metroid, exploration, puzzles, and combat. And I have to kind of believe what they say there, because if they were lying, they couldn't possibly have that many reviews. In fact, that's just a massive amount of reviews in general to have 2,169 reviews on Steam. A hand-drawn 2.5D action platformer, Bow Path of the Teal Lotus, has been published, is going to be published by Humble Games also. Let's see if we can get some visuals. It's very Japanese and perhaps a little bit too colorful for its own good, where the main character seems like they're way down here and it's hard to even keep them visually on sight. The main character is right here, and then there's just a lot of visual distractions in the background. Humble Games and Digital Sun announced a medieval fortress building game called Cataclysmo for PC. You really have to ask the question, is it beneficial for the publisher or the game developer, though, to make a whole bunch of announcements at the same time instead of staggering it out? And I guess it is. I guess the general idea is you have a big event where you announce a bunch of games to get everybody's attention, and then once you have you make that first impression and have people's attention, you hope that when you make further announcements about specific games, people are excited and hyped around those further announcements, versus just having a bunch of individualized initial announcements. Although, arguably, if you did just have a bunch of individualized initial announcements for games, you possibly could do a better job for a lot of games. It's really just a matter of the publisher not having much to say about these new games and trying to hide that fact by saying a lot about nothing, or very little about a lot of games. Humble Games and Bossa Games announced a co-op survival game called Lost Skies for PC. It too coming to Steam. If anything, I think this also highlights that the Humble video game stores is pretty much dead at this point. I have noticed that a couple of recent Humble bundles have caught my eye, where I've not been really interested in Humble bundles before. But yeah, as far as going to the Humble store or the Humble bundle, and it's the way it charges and takes a cut now, is less generous than it was. Although in all fairness, Humble Bundle needed to always have taken a cut in every sale, otherwise it was never going to be able to stay profitable or manage its own expenses. Jackalope Games has rebranded to Jackalyptic Games, and it's in development of a Warhammer game. This seems to me like the name change almost certainly was to avoid some kind of conflict or copyright where somebody else has the name Jackalope or Jackalope Games. It would make a lot of sense that there would be a board game company or something out there called Jackalope Games. It'd be really weird if they just changed the names because they're making a Warhammer game. That'd be very flippant and silly. And then we already talked about Super Mario Advance, Super Mario World, Super Mario Advance 2, and Yoshi's Island Super Mario Advance 3, which is to point out that Super Mario Advance is just a rebranding of existing games for the Super NES. Super Mario Advance says featuring Super Mario Bros. 2 and classic arcade Mario Bros., which means it's not including Super Mario Bros. 1 or 3, just Mario Brothers without the Super, and Super Mario Brothers 2, which would have been actually Doki Doki Panic, not the Super Mario Lost Levels that were sold as Super Mario Bros. 2 in Japan. Inti Creates announces a side-scrolling action game called Umbra Claw for PC. It's a new title from the Blaster Master Zero director Satoru Nishizawa. Very colorful screenshots. Perhaps too colorful for my liking. How many more Famitsu articles do we have? Well, we still have about 10. It is very random as far as just how many articles will come out in a day, in a couple days. Hana Owasi New Moon launches October 26th. This is a Hanafuda themed otome visual novel about a maiden and a continuously revolving moon. Hanafuda being the flower cards in Japan that don't have any writing, predecessors to like playing cards that you would have in the West. Otome meaning young maiden. Visual novels are novels with visuals. So yeah, that is quite a lot to wrap your head around, certainly. And so I would assume what the story is that each of the male romance protagonists is going to represent one of the Hanafuda cards, which that would be a lot of male protagonists, so maybe they will just represent some of the bigger, more important cards. Like if you included all the red ribbons and blue ribbons, that would be a lot. But if you just include like the big cards, those are Hanafuda cards there. It might be that the people don't represent any of the Hanafuda cards, and maybe they're just talking about Hanafuda a lot. Hanafuda is actually a pretty simplistic game. It's not super simplistic, but not really that difficult if you can learn it, and a pretty good game to play. Moving on, is it wrong to try to pick up girls in a dungeon? Familiar Myth Battle Chronicle has been delayed to August 26th. August 24th, no longer due out May 23rd. The Wonderful 101 Remastered free DLC, The Wonderful 101 World After School Hero, is now available. Okay. So that link actually took me directly to this, to the DLC. We can see Wonderful 101 Remastered overall is very positive. That's probably a game that should be on my short list to potentially play. So yeah, this will be a good example to see if I can make a YouTube short specifically around DLC instead of talking about the main game. Ghost of Tsushima sales have topped 1 million in Japan, which is a big number for Japan, certainly. It came out in July of 2020, so kind of slow growth and also kind of limited in that it's only PS4 and PS5. Sales of PlayStation games are going to go up since PlayStation 5 is finally available for purchase in Japan. Let's see, Quantumancy The Purgatory has been cancelled. It's apparently been cancelled due to a conflict over the game's creative direction, which it's kind of crazy to announce a game and then have it be canceled. It's going to be a roguelike action RPG for PlayStations and Xboxes and PC. You don't see this. This is literally the first time I've ever heard of a canceled game being canceled before it's just dragged out forever. Every other developer would just stop talking about the game and quietly cancel it or put it in development hell forever. The weird thing about this is that they're not really talking about the names behind it. They just said it was a passionate endeavor from the friendship between the executive director and director. Unfortunately, after 2 years of development, we found ourselves in conflict with our creative direction. To preserve our friendship, we decided to go our separate ways. The director will retain all rights and will continue to work on the project in alignment with his own vision, which is to say, that they're saying in the first sentence that it's been canceled, but then the second paragraph, the director will retain all rights and continue to work on this project in alignment with his own vision, which I guess means it's going to have a different name, because you can't continue to work on a project and also cancel the development of a game. This might be just the nicest way, even for a Japanese company, to say that the executive director has been fired or left the project. We look forward to sharing our future projects with you. Stay tuned to our online platforms for updates. Thank you for your understanding, Corcel teacher team. And they're not even naming anybody. If anything, this press announcement is probably the way all game companies should go in the future. Just say, there's an executive director and there's a director, but we're never going to tell you the name of that person so you can't harass them on Twitter. Of course, people should be named in credits, and if anything, people should get credits even before a game is launched and released. But yeah, a lot of people that work on games should be private people, and they shouldn't have public facing Twitters, and they shouldn't be on Twitter or be harassed on Twitter, one or the other, or any other sites. So yeah, I imagine if we do get announcements of cancellations, we will see no names being used in those announcements at the very least. Moving on, Gal Guardians Demon Purge Physical Edition launches June 15th in the West. Gal Guardians wasn't the original name. They changed it slightly, but yep, still a little bit of hype around Gal Guardians, but I don't think it's coming to PC yet. So I'm not sure we've gotten any kind of confirmation it would come to PC at all. Let's see. Nope, I was wrong. It's already on Steam. And I don't think there is a argument to make another YouTube short just because a physical edition is available. You can see this is 81% positive. I don't know why that wouldn't have been on the fall list, though. I guess the real danger here is that I may start to find games on Steam that in the first few weeks or months that it's released, it's not very positively reviewed, and then it gets better reviewed later. And that's something that mainstream video game journalism just does not do anything about. They don't go back and do retrospectives on old games. You might find some YouTubers that do that, but not a lot. Even when you think of like the completionist who's playing old games to 100% completion, he's really only playing like 100 games to 100% completion, and they are, for the most part, 100 games that he has already played once on his channel, and he's just redoing his first 100 games on his channel, which that takes up a lot of time, certainly. And if you were going to do retrospectives on a YouTube channel, you would almost certainly have to have 4 or 5 people playing games, not just one person, because there's a lot of old games. I guess my channel is the closest thing to playing old games, and even in that, I have to admit there's thousands of games I should have played and haven't yet, and probably won't ever get around to before I die of old age. Moving on, we already talked about the Sonic Symphony World Tour, and we already talked about Mortal Kombat 1 leak. Let's see, the God of War Ragnarok art direction, Rafael Grassetti leaves the Santa Monica studio after 10 years. More news on what's next for me next week. Which, you know, I don't know if that really means too much. I think a lot of people who had worked on God of War and God of War Ragnarok were tired of making God of War games, and I don't know if Sony was willing, as the publisher and funder of Santa Monica Studio, I don't know if they were willing to say, alright, let's give you a different project and let's hand over the God of War series to somebody else, and take that risk. Working anywhere for 10 years is a very reasonable amount of time to leave. Frankly, working anywhere for 4 years is very reasonable to leave. Even 2 years is alright. Anything less than that, you really haven't put in that much time. But then a lot of jobs you can tell are awful on day one. I don't know if I have anything more to say here. I did hear general chatter that more people were leaving, and there was just more brain drain around PlayStation and its second party studios. Let's see, the Dead by Daylight chapter in transmission launches June 13th. Survivor Nicolas Cage and more have been announced. Is Nicolas Cage a character that actually looks like Nicolas Cage? Yeah, it is. Somewhat looks like Nicolas Cage. I feel like, if I recall correctly, Dead by Daylight, he said they were going to give up on development as a game, and that would certainly explain the 50% positive reviews in the last 30 days. Let's see if we can see some of this. Don't buy if your mental health means anything to you. Toxic community, unbalanced game, anti-fun meta. Maps are random and will instantly decide if you win or lose the match. Dead by update. Years ago, it was great fun with friends and didn't take itself too seriously. Unfortunately, the game, but also the associated community, is developing a more and more negative direction. So there is a passionate people, group of people here that are not happy with the way this evolved. Let's see, could I find the end transmission? There's a ton of DLC here. $277 in DLC. That in itself is probably part of the problem. And some of this kind of makes sense, that if you're going to license Leatherface or the Saw characters or Ash vs. Evil Dead, maybe then you have to sell this DLC. But then the Survivor expansion pack here is like $30 and is mixed reviewed. And maybe you just don't try to have every single horror icon character. Hour of the Witch might be an original story. The problem with Dead by Daylight, though, is it's an asynchronous multiplayer game, online PvP, so it was always doomed to fail as soon as people stopped playing it. There's a lot online now, but nowhere near its all-time peak. But if the servers go down, you'll have nothing. You won't be able to play the game at all. Now, notably, one of the things I've never seen licensed in a video game, and this is probably a CW dropping the ball, is Supernatural, the TV series, 15 series. Like, if you can get, I can't remember the name. I know Dean, and I want to say the other brother's name is James, and I know it's not James. But yeah, and I can't remember the name of the angel that everybody liked. But you could get like Rowena, you could get the God character, Chuck, you could get Castiel, I believe is his name. You could definitely have a lot of the monsters from Supernatural and put them in a game like this and license that imagery. I guess maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it was a different asynchronous horror game that they said they were going to stop working on, because this definitely seems like they are still working on Dead by Daylight. That being said, we saw with the reviews that it seems like people are not super happy with it. Dead by Daylight has been around for 7 years, which is quite a long time, but also highlights the problem with online games in that they have to just continue to run forever. Otherwise, whoever buys it on its 7th year is going to get shortchanged when they stop adding content on the 8th year. And then a new Dead by Daylight games are in development at Supermassive Games and Midwinter Entertainment, expanding the Dead by Daylight mythology beyond the core game. Which, I guess maybe they could do that and make a more single-player game, or make a multiplayer game that isn't an asynchronous 4 versus 1. Supermassive is developing a new single-player interactive story game that will offer intensive narrative experience filled with powerful life or death choices within the backdrop of the Dead by Daylight universe, which I'm not sure what is canonically true in the Dead by Daylight universe at all. And then Midwinter Entertainment is developing a new multiplayer player versus environment game, that will tackle themes of greed, lust for power, with teams of up to 4 players taking on a strange new corner of the entity's realm. So yeah, you've got a single player experience by one company, and you've got a multiplayer player versus an event PvE game, which is a direct admission that Dead by Daylight 7 years in can't continue forever. They need to find something new that they can sell. Of course, the problem there is if the Dead by Daylight community is as toxic as people in the reviews were claiming, then 2 new Dead by Daylight games may be dead in the water if the community is really, really toxic. Or at least the multiplayer one might be dead in the water. Nobody's going to want to play a player versus event experience with 3 other jerks. Or at least 3 other jerks they don't know and don't happen to be friends with. Alright, so we've got some fall list cleanup to do. Fear and Hunger to Termnia. Is there a Fear and Hunger 1? Let's see. Let's check out this developer. Fear and Hunger 1 is like an old RPG game. It weirdly is in the adults only section. Game contains graphic violence, gores, use of drug, alcohol, nudity, and scenes of sexual nature, English and Russian. I question how much the adult content really is. Alright, well, this is very positive, so I'll put this on the wish list. And then, noticeably, when we go back to Fear and Hunger 2, it also is in the adult content section, even though none of the screenshots are really showing any kind of nudity or anything like that. Use of alcohol, drugs, self-destructive from suicide to self-harm, nudity, sexual content, depression, mental health, sexual violence, child abuse, atrocities that come with it. This definitely is a game that is selling itself as being incredibly dark. The actual look of the game doesn't really seem to be more than just an RPG game. Whatever though. We just have to go with mob rule, and when you have 1,000 people giving overwhelmingly positive reviews, then I have to follow it. And ironically, this might be the best adults-only game on Steam, although this may also be a game that originally was trying to sell itself or was sold outside of the adults-only section and got pushed into the adults-only section, perhaps unfairly. Right. Next we have a anime visual novel, very colorful, well drawn. It's part of the Fault series, as far as whatever that means. This is the latest entry in the Fault series, which has shipped over 500,000 copies worldwide. Those stories in Fault are presented in the form of chaotic visual novels, which tell gripping tales of human drama in a world where science fiction is melded with fantasy. Look at this animation going on here while they're talking. It's like a live 2D type animation, although arguably this isn't even live 2D. This is just fully animated loops, full animation loops. Alright, well, there's definitely nothing here that lets me eliminate it as an option. And then there's a lot of room here to potentially think about the other Fault visual novels, which are already on the wish list. Next Fault list cleanup we have is a game from 2021 called Fatal Core. It's a collectible card game. And while it is positive at 89% with 46 reviews, it is, like all collectible card games, going to require an active player base, of which I don't think there really is, because that is far too few views for a free collectible card game. That being said, even if it had thousands of positive reviews, I don't think there's anything in this CCG that would make me want to play it, so I'm going to say no. And then Fastest Fantasy Life Simulator, I think we can say no to that. I'm not sure why that would have even been on the fall list. Fast Burger Simulator is mixed, so I think we can say no to that. That was from January, so it's had a decent amount of time. Fast and Furious Spy Razors of Rise of Shifter is mixed and pretty irrelevant, so we can say no to that with only 18 reviews. Far Rock Dodgeball doesn't have any reviews, so we'll have to say no to that. Farming Simulator 2022 is very positive, so we'll say yes to that. Although, in all honesty, somebody would have to gift me Farming Simulator, and even if they did gift it to me, I would only really just do a spotlight around it. Farmer's Life is very positive, which, if anything, this is probably closer to the kind of farming simulator game I would want to play. It's something that feels like what farming would have been 50, 60 years ago before everything was just run by a tractor. And inherently, I assume farmers are having to deal with minor emergencies non-stop, and it isn't just the sweet life of hopping in an air-conditioned tractor that's GPS run and just sitting in the car for several hours. Farmer's Father Saved the Innocents, you can see it's mixed. It came out March 29th, but yeah, at a 56% positive rating, I think we can pretty well confirm that it's probably not going to get better. So then that brings us to the GameDeveloper.com news articles. GTA speculation intensifies after Take-Two teases groundbreaking titles. Honestly, though, that feels like a big oxymoron of a headline for GameDeveloper.com. How can a GTA game be groundbreaking? Like, unless it's literally going to break the ground. Like, anything that feels like or looks like a GTA, honestly, anything that even has GTA in the name, can't be that groundbreaking. It might be groundbreaking in the technology sense at best, but the gameplay mechanics can't be that groundbreaking. If they can somehow make a groundbreaking GTA title, I mean, it is possible it could happen. That I would be very surprised and excited by that. And that is certainly the teasing that Take-Two should do, is to say, hey, we're going to do something groundbreaking, instead of implying they're just going to do more of the same. Any publisher really should make that kind of promise if they can deliver on it. Let's see. Mortal Kombat 1 is NetherRealm's next and first game post the Warner Brothers merger. NetherRealm steps back in the rebooted ring. So yeah, AT&T owns Warner Brothers. I think Warner Brothers already owned NetherRealm though, so I don't think that is really implying much there. Other than the fact that AT&T wants to make money. It would be kind of crazy if AT&T said, no, don't make any more Mortal Kombat games. They're too violent. But that was not likely to happen. That really feels like an article that means nothing. Just reminding people that the merger happened. It probably was in development before the merger happened anyways, and nothing really implies that AT&T is going to fund more game development or less game development. It would be probably about the same. Oh yeah, that's one thing I've been doing too, is I've been watching the newest Twilight Zone that came out a few years ago on Amazon Prime. It was, I believe, a Paramount Plus exclusive when it originally came out. I want to say Jordan Peele is like the host. It is awful. And I do vaguely recall that most people thought it was awful. It clearly was written during the time in which coastal leftist elite writers were at their most irate anti-Trump possible, or just anti-right-wing conservative possible. And so getting further into the episodes, you just see that more and more and more. But that's not even the biggest problem, because in fairness, the original Twilight Zone, fairly liberal in its messaging. So that's not super crazy to be kind of liberal or progressive in the messaging of the Twilight Zone, but it's in the delivery. Very noticeably, the presenter, the Rod Serling replacement, doesn't show up quick enough in the new Twilight Zones, and the twist, or at least the initial twist, the initial hook of the story, does not show up anywhere quick enough in the first episodes. So very quickly, what I've done, and so I really haven't even given the new Twilight Zone a fair shake, I'll get 5-10 minutes into the episode and I'll get bored and I'll just skip to the end and just try to figure out what the twist even was to begin with, or what the twist at the end and the revelation at the end was going to be. And they just don't deliver on any of that. Like, within probably at least the first 3 or 4 minutes, there needs to be a big twist, that first hook twist. Then the Rod Serling announcer guy should come on and reiterate and double down on that hook twist, and just generally explain what's going to happen in the rest of the episode. And then you watch the rest of the episode, and then usually there's a big twist at the end. Although in a lot of cases of Twilight Zone stories, there might be somewhat of a big twist at the end, but a lot of times there aren't. And I think they are writing all the episodes to assume that there's only going to be a big twist at the end, and that's it. But yeah. One thing I would also say, since none of this has to do with video games, but I really did want to rant about that, is the original Twilight Zone, while it may have had very progressive and liberal ideas in a lot of its stories, it was done by a very, like, recognizable, down-to-earth actors. So while the ideas were a lot more subtle, or there was somebody that was very relatable and down to earth and just like a downright decent, often it was very country type actor that was doing the acting, so people watching could really relate to that and get to the end to hear the message, or at least hear the message, if not agree with it. Whereas the new Twilight Zones, like, people would just go, it was woke garbage, and turn it off, and after basically the first second of the first episode, because you have a fairly liberal comedian playing a comedian in the very first episode, and his whole bit at the very beginning is just a terrible joke set around the Second Amendment and gun controversies, wedge issues around guns, gun ownership and Second Amendment and things like that. So they just come out in the very first episode, in the first 5 minutes, beating you over the head with that message. And it doesn't even have anything to do with that episode. There's a later episode where another actor finds a gun and a bullet that has people's names on it, and so the bullet always finds its target and kills the person with the name on it, which is not that interesting of an idea either. I wouldn't say any of the ideas that they presented in the new Twilight Zones are that interesting anyways. They would have done better just remaking the original Twilight Zone episodes, that's a real smart move. Take the exact same story, exact same lines of dialogue that Rod Serling has already had written amongst his students, effectively, that he taught to write stories, and just have new actors say the same lines of dialogue. Maybe you change a thing here and there to explain why it's in modern times instead of the past, but that'd work very well, because very few people that are younger are going to want to watch the black and white Twilight Zones. You could also probably throw some AI into it and just reanimate the Twilight Zone episodes with fake hyper-realistic 3D characters. Anyways, I'm going on a rant here. I'm already 3 hours and 20 minutes into the stream. Apparently, Xbox may add time slices to its subscription model. Demos may be one way in which Microsoft draws extra revenue from Xbox Game Pass subscribers. I don't know what a timed slice would be. I guess they're calling it a demo. So you could play potentially the first 2 hours of a game just like Steam before buying it. The only difference is in Steam you have to buy it first and then you can ask for a refund. Yep. I guess that might work. Particularly if you could find 2 hours that are the best 2 hours of game, and say have somebody jump into like a Final Fantasy game where you're 100 hours already in, and then you play 2 hours of the best part in the middle of the game as the time slice. And then, yeah, that you definitely could do something like that. Microsoft, I imagine, will just experiment with everything that they possibly can. And then we already talked about them expanding their accessibility support and testing options, although we didn't really get as much details on that as I would have liked. Let's see, Amazon's new Lord of the Rings MMO won't impact Lord of the Rings Online. Standing Stone will continue to keep its Lord of the Rings MMO up and running as Amazon's Lord of the Rings MMO is being developed. Almost certainly one of those will eventually die. It'd be weird if there was 2 MMOs going on at the same time. Nintendo says that the Super Mario Bros. Movie has become a powerful touch point, which they're true. There will be kids decades from now that will have grown up remembering watching Super Mario Bros. The movie, and it will give them nostalgia to make them want to play Super Mario Bros. Games decades from now still. That being said, Nintendo still has plenty of opportunity to screw it up. They could make a bunch of terrible Mario movies. Even the sequel, if it was really, really bad, could undo the success of the Super Mario Bros. Movie. Or they could just make a terrible amount of Mario games. Or they could just make too few Mario games in general. So they have been given some promise by the success of the movie. Now they have to fulfill on that promise as far as delivering more good movies and more good games. We already talked about the name change to Jacolyptic Games, and their headline says they're going to pump out Warhammer titles, which arguably pumping out Warhammer titles is the standard mode of operating for Warhammer titles. And then there's a report here that Brace Yourself Games has laid off half its staff. Former staff are claiming that Brace Yourself had recently slashed half of its 43-person staff. What did Brace Yourself make as a game? This looks like Crypt of the Necrodancer. Yeah, Brace Yourself Games made its presence known in 2015 as Crypt of the Necrodancer, and the studio has since made steps to becoming a larger player in the indie scene. Last year it announced a shift to publishing titles from other indie developers, and inherently that is where you first should stop investing in a company, is when they say we are going to no longer make things, we're just going to publish things other people make. And even at that, they're saying they're going to be a publisher from other indie developers, but only a small handful at the time, so they weren't even willing to go big with it. It's Industries of Titan and Phantom Brigade, who merged with it, and was actually made by Tetragon Works. And then as a publisher, they released a game called Godless in 2022. At a certain point, I can't 100% blame them from collapsing. The thought that you made a game like Crypt of the Necrodancer and that you could go big off of its lucky success and being overhyped by mainstream video game journalists would have been a kind of silly thought. The concept works for one game, Crypt of the Necrodancer, and a sequel, and they even managed to get a Nintendo Crypt of the Necrodancer Zelda game made, so they had massive success for that one idea. But at that point, after that, you needed a whole nother game concept, something that probably wouldn't have been a rhythm-based game. You needed to have at least one other project, if not 2 or 3, in development. And if you don't have those ideas, and if you don't have a success quick enough, you should just lay off everybody and shut down the company and say, hey, we just need to go back to being a smaller company. From 43 to, I guess, 21 is, I guess there's probably a large difference between having 21 people working with you versus 43 people working with you. They say that a human being can only have 100 relationships at a time. I don't know how true that saying really is, but if that was the case, then all businesses really should have around 50 or less people, because you also have to have relationships with your friends and family. But yeah, I just don't see success if they had kept everybody and tried to just keep on making Crypt of the Necrodancer game or being a publisher, which obviously they really can't succeed as being a publisher. So I'm somewhat sympathetic. Of course, we all have to be sympathetic for people losing their job, even if they are probably overpaid game developers too, and hopefully they can go out and get another job or create their own indie games. But yeah, personally I always felt like Crypt of the Necrodancer was just overhyped as a game. But also I don't have any rhythm, so I couldn't play it even if I wanted to. Alright, now let's burn through the games that came out on Steam in the past couple days. Here we have a shoot 'em up called War, which I think deserves a YouTube short, but I'm not gonna ever want to play a shoot 'em up. City Racer can be no. Here we have our first adult game called Slave of the Succubus. Flat 2D anime, well, not really anime art style. Looks like there might be an RPG Maker game behind all the adult stuff. And I guess it is going, yeah, there is an RPG Maker actual game behind it. It's going into a fetish, yeah, with the actual turn-based RPG game, fighting even, that it's going into a fetish you don't see a lot in adult games, or I haven't seen a lot, in that you're seeing a guy really being a slave, being locked in a chastity cage, being dominated and controlled by this succubus lady. It is $8.99, English only. Female dominant character with BDSM, with questionable consent even. There is a Netflix series called Bonding, and the whole second season of it really is just addressing how badly they got the concept, or how much they ignored the concept of consent in the first season. I have to assume they got some feedback there. Although I think it's still very much, even the second season, a story that has a dominatrix, or a lady working as a dominatrix, as just a gimmick and not really the focus of the story as much, although season 2 focuses on it a lot more. The whaler here doesn't look like anything of interest. Graduated. Looks like it might be something. Lusty God is probably our second adult game here. Well, this is an interesting concept, certainly. It's one of these alchemy games where you get 2 items and you merge it together to create another item. So, like fire and water create steam. Then you can have steam and you mix it together. Except for the fact that this is an adult game, so you create adult versions of things. So I'm seeing like a screenshot here of a tree penetrating this white-haired, barely dressed lady, or completely undressed in some of the scenes, and it seems like you can make at least a golem at some point and then get a full-on sex scene animation. It's $1.79, which is not particularly expensive for this type of game. It says it has English and full audio. Because this is an alchemy game, the real question would be, how many items are there? Because these could be very few items, or it could be quite a lot. Okay, looking at the screenshots, it doesn't say in the description. Every screenshot says there are 169 creations and 15 groups. So that's a decent amount for one of these alchemy games. That means that there's probably, let's see, 369, maybe 12 items, maybe 10 items in each group. Not a terrible idea. Definitely different than the match 3 type of game that you typically get in adult games. It's not going super heavy in the adult content either. It is just pixely art that is in line with all the other pixely art for the different types of items. So this is one I want to put on the follow list. So that's exactly what I'll do. That way I can see how well it's received by other gamers. Next we have yet another adult game called Melia's Witch Test, which looks like it's an RPG Maker game. They are really just putting the adult scenes directly on top of the RPG screen. In this case though, it looks like the RPG Maker may not even really be widescreen most of the time. It seems like it's more cell phone in size. As an adult game, there's only this one purple-haired flat 2D anime girl. So if you don't like the looks of her, you're Not going to get any variety there. $3.99. It's not particularly expensive. It's English, Japanese, and Chinese. That being said, since it is just an RPG Maker game, I don't think I could put that one on the follow list. And certainly it is weird that the video played for that game. And I guess we're getting bundling again because we're just getting all the adult games in a row. Next we have Sex Simulator BDSM. This is 3D CGI characters. Purple-haired lady, silver-haired lady, a guy with tattoos and short hair. Seeing bondage things, like people being pilloried or tied up to a chair. If anything, I would say this game probably has more of the kind of bondage, large furniture pieces than you normally would see. But I don't think there's really much here. It's just one of these visual novel games. It's $2.09, not terrible. English only. But nothing particularly amazing here. It's spanking. Yep. Kind of just a boilerplate game with a boilerplate name. Sex Simulator BDSM. I don't know if it really is even a simulator. I am seeing a lot of like bar graphs in the game, so I don't know if there's perhaps a mini game there where you're trying to balance out stamina, pleasure, pain, or something like that. Do we finally have a game we can actually show and not blur here? Yes, we have a game called Hauma, I guess. I don't know how you pronounce that. A detective noir story, but it's a prologue demo. Looks like there might be something interesting here, but I would be very much more interested in the actual game and not a prologue. Okay, let's put that on the follow list. And then I want to go back. It says search. One title has been excluded by your preferences. View unfiltered. Two resulting matches of your search. Your content preferences have not been played, performed. Click here to perform the search again with your preferences applied. Well, I am confused. It seems like I'm getting the same results either way. So I just have to assume the search is broken there. Next we have a game called Zinful Journey, which doesn't look like anything. Yeah, we have a game called Durable, which is Lingering, which says it has sexual content and nudity, yet is not in the adult content section. We have a flat 2D kind of anime, but I would say it's probably being drawn by a Western animator. Characters, but mostly it does look like it is just not even an RPG Maker game. If anything, it seems like it is somebody trying to make an RPG Maker type game, but not using RPG Maker. Or perhaps they're just using custom tile sets and art, which makes it seem so different. Regardless, Adorable Witch 5 Lingering doesn't really look like it has much of anything to it, so I'm going to say no. And then we are back to another adult game in the adult section called Vampire Girls, which are flat 2D, more bourgeois pictures of vampire girls, going for more of a slightly more Western colorful art style, anime inspired style. And that's pretty much all the screenshots too. The actual game itself doesn't even have a screenshot, so I can't even really tell. It says the game is a classic puzzle game with several levels of difficulty, so I assume there it is just a slide puzzle game. It's $1.59 and English only. And as far as Vampire Girls go, a lot of these poses are just showing somebody who could easily not be a vampire by just painting in vampire teeth, or could have been a non-vampire that added vampire teeth after the fact. It really is just a collection of ladies in their underwear and nude laying around in bourgeois poses, which is pretty soft core, if I could, generally speaking. You have a game called Unicyclist, which looks like a big vomit of yellow tones. Ludo Tactics is, I assume, just that game Ludo implemented poorly in the digital format. Next we have yet another adult game in the adult section called Feet Sweeper. What's noticeable about this is you have realistic 3D CGI characters that are also bouncing around like a live 2D animation, so it gives a little bit more of a breathing feeling and a liveliness to the characters. The actual game is just Minesweeper with what seems like random backgrounds, and it does definitely feel like it's just asset flipped 3D models. And honestly, if you are focusing on the feet fetish, it doesn't make the most amount of sense, because a lot of times their feet are almost completely off screen and covered up in these screenshots when you're playing the Minecraft, the Minesweeper part of it. And it's only when you win and get the cutscenes do you see a little bit of feet, but often they're still wearing shoes. And so there's like a screenshot here where the head is cut off, and so you're just really seeing legs and feet and shoes. So it's not really even a good feet fetish adult game. They're selling it for $2.69, which feels way too expensive, and it's English only. And that definitely feels like a low effort game trying to play to a fetish that even the creators don't have any interest in. Giant Defense here doesn't look like anything of interest. And man, we are just chock full of adult games. Has it been a slow week as far as adult games? Maybe a little bit, but it didn't feel like it was being that slow. And now, on a Friday, we have just had a massive amount of adult games, which makes me concerned that we're potentially going to start seeing severe censorship in the form of bundling all the adult games that come out on late Fridays and or just the weekends, and not have as much of a chance of being seen by people interested in buying games. In the same way that putting a TV show on Friday evenings or Saturday nights is highly unlikely to get as many viewers if instead of putting it like on primetime on a Tuesday or Wednesday. The next game we have here is called Monstrous Love, and this is flat 2D, almost comic booky drawings. It's going with an interesting twist in that seems like you're playing as this kind of plant-like creature, or maybe there's just a collection of forest-like creatures here. Yeah, because there's like a Jersey Devil type creature, and then like a werewolf type creature. So at a certain level, even though they're monsters, this is basically a bestiality visual novel, it looks like. I'm not sure if you're playing as the female characters, which it looks like there's 3 or 4 of them, one for each of the monster characters, or if you're playing as the monsters. It definitely feels like it is more of a dating sim romance game though. $4.99, English, Portuguese, Brazil, Chinese, then Japanese, which makes me feel like this is probably a Portuguese Brazilian authored game. They actually are naming the author here in the description, and I don't see that very much. It's a unique hand-drawn art style adapted from the popular comic by the author herself, Anna Pepper !flirt, which I guess there is a comic out there called Flirt that I'm not familiar with. Around an hour of gameplay with mini games and several achievements. Sex positive gaming. At a certain level, that idea makes a lot of sense too, to promote a comic, an adult comic, by making a short dating sim visual novel. Cross promote that way. This looks particularly interesting as a game just because of there potentially being a comic, I assume, connected to it to make a dating simulation while you're dating monsters. It's human girls dating monsters, and it not being grotesque or exploitative, or like a lot of the other furry games feel like they are just intentionally trying to be as grotesque as possible. This art style feels very light in the way things are drawn, and it's just like everybody feels like they're just having a fun time. So yeah, that's an intriguing game. I'll put that on the fall list. Which inevitably there's just a larger and larger amount of adult games that are ending up on the fall list, and then we're doing fall list cleanups to get rid of all the other games. Of course, I need to play games if I'm going to buy new games, and I can't really take much of a blame here in the fact that today I've talked about a ton of adult games in a row. That's Steam's fault for putting all the games out back to back. Am I making YouTube shorts around these kinds of games? I guess I will. Dead Monarchy doesn't look like much of anything. My power just flickered. I'm late into the evening. I started too late. I'm not really waking up anywhere at the time as I should. Like yesterday in particular, I had somewhere to be and I still woke up and went back to sleep. Shoot. The power flickered apparently enough to mess up my internet, so looks like my router may have reset. Well, we'll have to continue going forward, even at that. That would also explain why these are not loading. Which that means I can only do so much until I am reconnected. Cafe Zero, the Sleeping Beast, I'll have to just look at the screenshot thumbnails. And I guess I really can't do anything anyways. This is a game I would put on the fall list, but until we're reconnected, then I I can't really add things to the follow list. It's just not going to work. And there's one thing about this new router is that it does take a little bit longer to reset. Also, I don't have anything plugged into it, so it may be just straight up broken because of the reset. Okay. Yeah, it may not work at all because I didn't have the hard drive plugged into it. Okay, so I'm just gonna move forward for the recording's sake. Surprise cat doesn't look like anything. Bullet time battle. The good news is there's probably not that much left. Bad times at the Silver Lake. I'll put that on the follow list later. Well, the Borncraft looks like nothing. Tim Clippy's Warfare looks like nothing. The 7th Awakenings I Randall looks like nothing. Dead City looks like nothing. Ah, we're back. Good, it did work. So we'll put that on the follow list. And we'll put that on the follow list. Make a YouTube short around that. That does take a long time. I need to get better battery backups, like, and replace the batteries. That is another thing to take the next step on. And really, I should not put that off. I've put it off too long. Let's see. Against all odds, it doesn't look like anything of interest. I would frankly be a little surprised if we ran into yet another adult game today, but certainly could happen. This game Dead Ink almost would catch my attention, but it feels like it's a top-down camera angle for no good reason. I just don't see a reason why you'd want to have such nice visuals and then look downward and not be able to actually see the visuals at an angle that would be useful around that. Top down should be more simplified in its visuals. Like even there in that little gameplay section, it's pretty obvious that it would be hard to see the enemies with the grass element hiding them. So I have to say no to that. Avian Knights looks like it's a Joust clone. I'll make a YouTube short around that. I'm not going to put it on the follow list. Vidlope. I'm going to put that on the follow list. Inferno Quest Journey Through the Lava Cavern. If it says cavern. That's a no. Just Survived the Zombie Awakening. Probably is a no, but I'll give it a chance. Dagdrom. Looks like it might be an interesting visual novel. We'll see. Point and click adventure, not a visual novel. Emily the Ghost of White Willow is a VR game. I would say for a VR game, doesn't look like the visuals are quite polished enough. I'll say yes to that. We have another hidden object game. This by a different studio than what you usually see. Saint Hill. Doesn't look like anything. Blockbill doesn't look like anything. Holy Ship doesn't look like anything. Like off-road simulators are no. Horror X Plus has some dark screenshot syndrome in its horror elements, so I'm gonna say nope to that. Actually, I'll give it a chance. And then we have Hime's Blossom, which looks like a visual novel. You have some anime girls in kimonos, and then a simple puzzle game. What's weird about this though is this isn't in the adult section, so the reward for doing the puzzles is just going to be some fairly tame images, 84 cents, and then there's a free not safe for work content, which does put me in an interesting position where I can make a YouTube short around a game like this if I want to, and that should still be fine. So I'm gonna do that. There is an incredibly small amount of feedback I've gotten as far as the YouTube shorts, as far as what people like and what people don't. Inherently, the amount of reach any one YouTube short gets versus another is not very well compared. So if one YouTube short got 5 views and one got only 1, that may very well be just because it was only offered to one person and have nothing to do with the actual content. I am really comparing almost exact apples to apples when I do the YouTube shorts because it's the exact same video almost completely, with the only slight difference being the type of game that is being shown. And I guess in the long run, if I got enough feedback, I may find that people aren't interested in visual novels, or they aren't interested in tabletop games. But I would need a lot more views to get that kind of feedback, to get any proper sampling size. We have yet another adult game here. At least it wasn't in a row. Called Roommate Corruption. 3D CGI characters. I wouldn't particularly call them super realistic though. They have a little soft CGI look to them, and it definitely just feels like it's a visual novel with nothing particularly special in it. $5.09 English and Russian. So I wouldn't be surprised if this is a low effort Russian game. Nothing particularly interesting happening in the story either. It's just like you ended up sleeping with your roommate. It's a pretty basic story. Lobby loitering. Doesn't look like anything. Rune it out. Doesn't look like anything. Alright, and so then that leaves us, that was the last one. So we are done for today. That's going to be it for this stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos. If you want to friend or follow me on any social media sites, there's a whole bunch of links down below. And if you want to support me further, there's a link to Patreon, or you can friend me on Steam and get me a game off my wish list. Thank you for watching. Have a good evening.